Belinda Audio and the O'Brien Press present this unabridged recording of The Mammy, Agnes Browne, Book 1. Written and read by Brendan O'Carroll.
March 29th, 1967. Dublin. Like all government buildings, the interior of the public waiting room in the Department of Social Welfare was drab and uninviting. The walls were painted in three colours: government green, as it was known to all in Dublin, on the bottom half, and either cream or very old white on the top half, with a 1-inch strip of red dividing the two. The only seating consisted of two pew-like wooden benches. These were covered with gouged-out initials and dates. Lighting for the room was provided by one large opaque bowl-like fixture, hanging from a 6-foot cable. The outside of the bowl was dusty, the inside yellowed and speckled with fly shit. In the bottom of the bowl lay a collection of dead flies. "Serves them right," said the woman, staring at the globe. "What? Serves who right, Agnes?" her companion asked, tenderly. "Them, Marion." She pointed to the globe. "Them flies. Serves them right." Marion looked up at the globe. For a couple of minutes they both stared at the light. "Jesus, Agnes, I'm not with you. Serves them right for what?" Marion was puzzled and not a little concerned about Agnes's state of mind. Grief is a peculiar thing. Agnes pointed at the globe again. "They flew into that bowl, right? They couldn't get out, so they shit themselves and died. Serves them right, doesn't it?" Marion stared at the globe again, her mouth slightly open, her mind trying to work out what Agnes was on about. Agnes was now back, scanning her surroundings. The wall clock tick-tocked. Again she looked at the only other person in the room. He was a one-legged man, half standing, half propped up, at the hatch. She heard him making his claim for unemployment benefit. He was a gutchie, a night watchman on a building site. He'd just been sacked because some kids had got onto the site and broken the windows. The girl was phoning his former employer to ensure that he'd been sacked and had not left of his own accord. Agnes was trying to imagine what it must be like to be sacked. You see, being self-employed, she'd never been sacked. "Fuck them," Marion broke the silence. "Who?" asked Agnes. "Them flies," Marion pointed. "Fuck them, you're right. Shitting on everything else all their lives. Serves them right." "Oh, Agnes, is this fella going to be much longer? I'm bursting for a slash." Marion had a pained expression on her face. Agnes looked over the man's shoulder. The girl was just putting the phone down. "She's nearly finished. Look, there's a toilet out in the hall. You go on. I'll be all right. Go on." Marion bolted from the waiting room. At the same time, the girl returned to the hatch. "Right then, Mr. O'Reilly. Here's your signing on card. You'll sign on at hatch 44 upstairs in Gardner Street at 9:30 a.m. on Friday, OK?" The man looked at the card and then back at the girl. "Friday? But this is Monday. Your man wouldn't pay me. I've no money." The girl became very businesslike. "Well, that's between you and him, Mr. O'Reilly. You'll have to sort that out yourself. Friday, 9:30, hatch 44. The man still didn't leave. "What'll I do between now and Friday?" The girl had had enough. "I don't care what you do, but you can't stand there till Friday, that's for sure. Now go on, off with you." "He's a bollocks," the man told the girl. She blushed. "That's enough of that, Mr. O'Reilly." But he hadn't finished. "If I'd had me other leg, I'd fucking give it to him, I would." The girl bowed her head in a resigned fashion. "If you had your other leg, Mr. O'Reilly," she snapped, "you would have caught the children and you wouldn't be here now, would you?" She closed the doors of the hatch in the hope that Mr. O'Reilly would vanish. He gathered himself together, slid the card into his inside pocket. He put his glasses into a clip-lid box and popped his crutch under his arm. As he made for the exit, he said aloud, "And you're the bollocks too." He opened the door of the waiting room just as Marion got to it. "That one's a bollocks," he said to her, and surprisingly quickly he headed off down the hallway. Marion looked after him for a moment and then turned to Agnes. "What was that about?" she said as she took her seat beside her friend. Agnes just shrugged. "I don't know." "Well, did you go?" "Yeah." "Are you all right then?" "I'm grand." "Jesus, the paper they use in here cuts the arse off you." "That old greaseproof stuff?" "Yeah, it's like wiping your arse with a crisp bag." "Mm-hmm." "Well, what are we waiting for? I was waiting for you to come back. Come on." The two women went to the hatch. Agnes pressed the bell, and they heard no sound. "Press it again," said Marion. Agnes did. Still no sound. Marion knocked on the hatch door. Behind they could hear the sound of movement. "Someone's coming," whispered Agnes. Then, as if she was preparing to sing, she cleared her throat with a cough. The hatch opened. It was the same girl. She didn't look up. Instead, she opened the notebook and, still with the head down, asked, "Name and social welfare number?" "I don't have one," Agnes replied. "You don't have a name?" The girl now looked up. "Of course she has a name," Marion now joined in. "It's Agnes, after the blessed Agnes. Agnes Browne." "I haven't got a social welfare number." "Don't be ridiculous. Everyone has a social welfare number." "Well, I haven't." "Well, your husband, is he working?" "No, not anymore." "Ah, so he signed on then?" "No." "Why not?" "He's dead." The girl was now silent. She stared at Agnes and then at Marion. "Dead?" Both women nodded. The girl wasn't giving up. "Do you have your widow's pension book with you?" "I haven't got one, that's why I'm here." "Ah, so this is a new claim." The girl felt better now that she had a grasp of what was going on. She lifted a form from below the counter. Both women shot glances at each other, a look of fear crossing their faces. They regarded the answering of questions and forms as an exam of some kind. Agnes wasn't prepared for this. The girl began the interrogation. "Now, your full name?" "Agnes Loretta Browne." "Is that Brown with an E?" "Yeah, Agnes with an E and Loretta with an E." The girl stared at Agnes, not sure that this woman wasn't taking the piss out of her. "Your maiden name?" "Redden." "Lovely. Now, your husband's name?" "Nicholas Browne. And before you ask, I don't know his maiden name." "Nicholas Browne will be fine. Occupation?" Agnes looked at Marion, back at the girl, and then said softly, "Dead." "No, when he was alive. What did he do when he was alive?" "Oh, he was a kitchen porter." "And where did he work?" Again Agnes looked into Marion's blank face. "In the kitchen," she offered, hoping it was the right answer. "Of course in the kitchen. Which kitchen? Was it a hotel?" "It's still a hotel. Isn't it, Marion?" Marion nodded. "Which hotel?" The girl was exasperated now, and the question came out through her teeth. "The Gresham Hotel in O'Connell Street, love." Agnes answered confidently. This was an easy one. The girl scribbled in the answer and moved down the form. "Now, what was the cause of death?" "A hunter," Agnes said. "Was he shot?" the girl asked incredulously. "Was your husband shot?" "By who?" Agnes asked the question as if the girl had found out something about her husband's death that she didn't know herself. "The hunter. Was your husband shot by a hunter?" Agnes was puzzled now. She thought it out for a moment, and then a look of realisation spread over her face. "No, love. A hillman hunter. He was knocked down by a hillman hunter. A car." The girl stared at the two women, then dismissed the thought that this might be candid camera. These are just two gobshites, she told herself. "A motor accident, I see." She scribbled again. The two women could see that she was now writing on the bottom line. They were pleased. But then she turned the form over to a new list of questions. The disappointment of the women was audible. The young girl felt it, and in an effort to ease the tension of the two, she said, "That must have been a shock." Agnes thought for a moment. "Yeah, it must have been. Sure, they couldn't have been expecting it." The girl glanced around the room, wondering, could it be possible that there was a hidden camera? Again she dismissed it. "Right, let's move on. Now, how many children do you have?" "7. "7? A good Catholic family." They're all right, but you have to bake the older ones to Mass." "I'm sure. I'll need their names and ages." "Right, let me see. Mark, he's the eldest, he's 14. Then Francis, he's 13. Then the twins, there's 2 of them. Simon and Dermot, 12, both of them. Then Rory, he's 11. After him there's Cathy. She was forceps, very difficult. "I remember it," said Marion. "You're a martyr." Sure, Marion, what can you do?" "She's 10. And then last of all there's Trevor, the baby, he's 3. The form had been designed to accommodate 10 children, so there was plenty of space left. The girl ran a line through the last 3 spaces and moved on to the next section. In the back of her mind, she wondered what it was between 1957 and 1964 that gave Mrs. Browne the break. Now, when did your husband die? 4:30. Yes, what day? This morning. This morning? But sure, he couldn't even have a death certificate yet. Oh, God, no. Not at all. Sure, he didn't even go past primary. No, a death certificate. I need a death certificate. A certificate from a doctor stating that your husband is in fact dead. He could be alive, for all I know. No, love. Definitely dead. Definitely, isn't he, Marion? Marion agreed. Absolutely. I know him years, and I've never seen him look as bad. Oh, dead. Definitely dead. Look, Mrs. Browne, I can't process this until you get a death certificate from a hospital or a doctor that pronounces your husband dead. Mrs. Browne's eyes half closed as she thought about this. So if I can't get this until tomorrow, I lose a day's money. You won't lose anything, Mrs. Browne. It will be backdated. You'll get every penny that's due to you, I promise. Marion was relieved for her friend. She poked her in the side. Backdated? Now, that's grand. So you needn't have rushed at all, Agnes. Agnes wasn't convinced. Are you sure? The girl smiled. I'm absolutely sure. Now look, take the form with you. It's filled in already. And when you get the death certificate, hand them both in together. Oh, and bring your marriage certificate along with you. You'll get that from the church you were married in. In the meantime, Mrs. Browne, if you need some money to get by on, just call down to the Dublin Health Authority office in Jervis Street and see the relieving officer there. Agnes took all this in. The relieving officer. Jervis Street. The girl nodded. Jervis Street. Agnes folded the form. She was about to leave, but she turned back to the girl. Don't mind that one-legged gotchy. You're very good, love. And you're not a bollocks. With that, the 2 women stepped back out into the March sunshine to prepare for a funeral. If there can be such a thing, it was a great funeral. Agnes sat in the front pew during the Mass, flanked by Marion on one side and her 7 orphans on the other. The children were pale from a mixture of fear, because they didn't really understand what was going on, and excitement, because people kept coming up to them and rubbing their hair and mumbling, God bless you, or God love you, child, at the same time pressing money into their hands. As the priest announced that the Mass had ended, a line of people formed, and one by one they shook hands with Mrs. Browne and Mark, and they patted the heads of the children. Almost without exception, they would say to Mrs. Browne, sorry for your troubles. And to Mark, you're the man of the house now, good lad. Mark understood this, well, nearly understood it. It meant he thought that he would be expected to take his father's place, bring in the money, protect the family, both of which he was prepared to do and felt able to do. He worried, though, he hoped it didn't also mean that he had to sleep with his mother. He wasn't into that. No way. The hearse pulled slowly away from the church. Behind it walked the funeral attendants, led by the Browne family. Mammy was flanked by her children, Cathy holding her left hand and Frankie linking her right arm. Mark walked behind her. He held Trevor's hand, and beside him walked Rory, holding a twin in each hand. It was about a mile to Ballybox Cemetery. On the way, the hearse turned down James Larkin Court. All the curtains and all the windows in every flat were drawn. The hearse stopped outside the Browns' front door. On the door, a simple white card with a black border was pinned. It read, Reza Browne, R.I.P. The hearse paused for a minute, then with a growl, moved on again. They were within sight of the cemetery when Agnes first heard the hiss. She was puzzled initially, but then a huge puff of steam from the front of the Ford Zephyr, that was the hearse, announced that something was amiss with the vehicle. It stopped abruptly, and the trailing crowd came to a ragged halt. The driver and his assistant jumped from the front of the vehicle. Some of the men went up to join them. There followed a communal staring into the engine, then a discussion of how far the cemetery was. The distance was a moot point. It seemed it was just too far to carry the coffin, and yet the vehicle could not be driven for fear of damaging the engine. The decision was made to push the hearse to the gates and carry the coffin from there. More men were drafted from the cortege, and with a heave, the Zephyr lurched forward. Kevin Carmichael had been employed for 25 years by Solemn Sites Limited, the owners of Ballybox Cemetery. He started as a gravedigger and over the years had worked his way up to cemetery manager. He loved his job, and ordinarily the cemetery ran like clockwork. Of course, from time to time little hiccups would occur. During the strike of '63, graves had to be dug by the family members, and once a well-known Dublin prostitute, who was supposed to be laid to rest in her family grave, ended up, because of a clerical error, joining the Sisters of Divine Revelation. The mistake was quickly rectified, and the prostitute's family thought it was hilarious, and nobody ever told the sisters. Today had all the makings of a bad day at the cemetery. Kevin prided himself on planning the arrival of funerals to be at least 15 minutes apart, so as to give a semblance of privacy to each family. But a mixture of errors and circumstances saw 3 of today's burials arrive simultaneously. The Clark funeral, it was running well behind schedule, due to the priest having a heart attack mid-mass. By the time an ambulance was called and a replacement priest found, Thomas Clark, deceased, was indeed late for his own funeral by 1 hour. The second funeral in the Browne family was now arriving 20 minutes late. The reason for this was obvious, as 10 red-faced men pushed a huge zephyr into the cemetery reception area. To top matters off, the O'Brien party were spot on time. So Kevin now had 3 funerals arriving together and bedlam for lunch. Fresh men were needed to carry Redzer's coffin. Those who had pushed the hearse were knackered. 4 barmen from Foley's pub were appointed pallbearers, along with the 2 men from the funeral home. As the pallbearers moved through the now huge crowd, they joined the other 2 coffins, also being carried shoulder high. With all 3 coffins in a row, the procession began and everything went well for a while. The huge crowd following the 3 coffins. It looked like a mass funeral. Suddenly, one of the coffins broke ranks and took off down a side route. The crowd now rumbled with questions. Which one was that? They all wanted to know. It was turning into a gigantic version of the shell game. A decision was made by someone, and a large portion of the crowd broke away in pursuit of the stray coffin. The children looked to Agnes for guidance. And, decisive as always, Agnes said, "Follow the one on the left. That's your da." The words "the one on the left" went through the crowd like Chinese whispers. At the next junction, the one on the left veered to the left and up a small hill. Agnes and the children followed, and so did the crowd. After some 500 yards or so, the coffin was laid across 2 planks on top of the grave. The crowd milled around this spot, and when everybody was in position, there was a deathly quiet. "Our Father, who art in heaven," the priest began, like the first singer in a sing-song. The huge crowd joined in, and Agnes wiped a tear from her eye. The children huddled close to her, and this made Agnes feel a little less lonely. She glanced around the crowd. Old friends were there, and there were also a good few she didn't recognise. But Redzer was a popular man. On the far side of the grave, she picked out an attractive-looking woman who, like herself, was dressed in black, and was sobbing. Agnes didn't recognise her. At first she was puzzled, then slowly it began to creep in. The suspicion, for the first time in her life, that Redzer Browne might have been having an affair. As the prayer ended and the coffin was lowered into the grave, Agnes muttered under her breath, "You dirty bastard." Meanwhile, only 400 yards away, the real Redzer Browne was buried with just 4 men in attendance. Fittingly, they were all barmen from Foley's pub. Agnes Browne could take a lot of abuse. She'd had a lot of practice. She was beaten regularly by her father. She was beaten in school, and of course, Redzer beat her. But at least he only beat her when he felt he had a good reason. She never told anyone about the beatings from Redzer. She tried once, when she was 20 years of age, the very first time. She was just married. They just moved into the flat in Larkin Court, and she was as happy as a lark. They'd gotten a bed from Redzer's granny in Ringsend. She'd had it in the attic. And they'd ordered a new Formica-top table, 4 chairs and a settee from Cavendish's in Grafton Street. £2.50 a week over 3 years, with a week free every Christmas. The table and chairs arrived on the Friday, and although Agnes was disappointed that the vanman hadn't brought the settee as well, he promised he would bring it the next day, Saturday. Redzer ate his dinner off the new table that night. He hardly noticed it, and his only comment before he pushed his plate away and went to dress for his darts match was, "Well, it doesn't make the dinner taste any better." Agnes always rose early on a Saturday. She didn't have to work because she had an arrangement with Marion. Agnes looked after both stalls on a Friday, and Marion did both on a Saturday. But still, she would be up at 7 a.m. That Saturday she boiled a pot of water and filled a trough to make a warm, bubbly bath. She bathed Mark, then a baby, and dressed him. At exactly 8:30 she carried Mark and his go-kart down the stairs, strapped him in and headed for the second-hand market on George's Hill. The highlight of Agnes's week was her Saturday rummage through the mountains of clothes, shoes and bric-a-brac of this market. She knew all the traders' nicknames and why they had them. For instance, Bungalow. He was a retarded man that ran and fetched for dealers. They sent him for chips or cigarettes or whatever. He got his name because, like a bungalow, he had nothing upstairs. On the other hand, Buddha, who sold bedsteads, buckets and sewing machines, was very smart and got his name from the way he spoke, every sentence beginning with Buddha. This Saturday, Agnes just skimmed around the dealers instead of stopping, rooting and chatting, because she wanted to be back in time to meet the van man with her new, brand new settee. She arrived back to the flat at about 11 o'clock. As she entered the building, old Mrs. Ward, who lived in the ground floor flat, met her on the landing. "Your fella's gone out," she announced. Mrs. Ward fancied herself as the keeper of the castle, and the residents of the building used to say you couldn't fart, but she knew about it, and by the time she was finished telling someone else about it, it was a shite. Agnes didn't even look at her as she struggled up the stairs with the child and go-car. She just replied, "I know." "Overtime, is it?" "No." "Gone up to his mother's?" Agnes didn't reply, half because she was nearly breathless and half because she didn't want to. Failure to reply never stopped Mrs. Ward, for even as Agnes was opening her door 2 floors up, she could hear the old bat carry on below. "Hard to get them away from their mothers, these young bucks." Agnes closed the door to a muffled, "Oh yes, they love their mothers, loved them." She plunked the go-cart down and took off her headscarf. As she was unwrapping the baby, she glanced over at her new table and chairs. Lovely. The table was in a mess from the remains of Red's breakfast. A dirty mug, a sugar bowl, a bottle of milk, and a teapot scattered around. The butter, with the wrapping wide open like a grease-proof butterfly. And half a loaf of bread. Agnes decided she would put young Mark down for his nap before tackling the mess on the table. Once the child was asleep, she could have the whole afternoon to herself. Redzer never came back from the bookie shop on a Saturday, not before the last race was over anyway. The fresh air had done Mark the world of good, and he went to sleep quickly, his rosy cheeks puffing contentedly. Agnes came back into the only other room of the flat and went over to her radiogram, a bargain she'd got from Buddha for £3. She selected 6 records from her pile, all Cliff Richard of course, and loaded them on the spindle. She set the speed to 45 and flicked the play button. The arm lifted and a record made a little plap sound as it hit the deck. Agnes began to pin her hair up as Cliff went into English Summer Garden. She loved Cliff. So did Redzer. In fact, Agnes had noticed the letters CLIFF tattooed across Redzer's knuckles before she'd even seen his face on the night that they'd met. With her hair tied up, Agnes attacked the mess on her new table. When the table was cleared, butter in the scullery, loaf of bread in the bread bin, Agnes took a damp cloth to the table. On her first wipe, she noticed them. 4 long, straight gouges. They were made by the bread knife as it cut through the loaf. They were made by Redzer. Her heart dropped. She sat down and ran her fingers over the cuts, slowly, as if somehow this might heal the wounds in her brand new Formica top table. But it didn't. As Cliff belted out in the country, Agnes wept quietly. Her table was no longer new. When Redzer came home, Agnes was sitting on her new settee. Mark was by the fireplace, a cushion under his head and one of his cot blankets over him. He was awake, but contented to lie there in the heat of the fire, watching the flickering flames dance from coal to coal. Usually Agnes would have noticed that Redzer was in a foul mood, but today she didn't care. He didn't say hello or talk to the baby, but took off his coat, threw it over one of the new kitchen chairs and opened the oven. It was cold and empty. "Where's me dinner?" He spoke into the oven. "You cut me table," Agnes said quietly. "What?" "You cut me table." Agnes's voice now went up a notch. "Look at it." "Fuck the table. Where's me dinner, woman?" "It can't be fixed, you know. You can't fix Formica." "Are you going deaf? Where's me fucking dinner?" "I didn't cook your fucking dinner. Now will you look at me table?" "You didn't cook me dinner." "You didn't cook me dinner." Redzer advanced towards Agnes, and she saw the warning signs His bottom lip went white and began to quiver. His forehead began to redden and his temples to pulsate. She stood, he stopped. There was a madness in his eyes. They seemed to jump about. She went to speak. The slap, when it came, seemed vaguely familiar. He used the back of his right hand, the one with cliff across the knuckles. It met the right side of her face full on. Her head spun to the left towards the fireplace and her now wide-eyed and frightened son. She remembered. It was familiar. It was identical to her father's slap. She wondered if her dad had taken Redzer aside and shown him how it was done, or did young boys get taught this in school? She tasted the blood in her mouth. She didn't cry. A man's slap had long since ceased to be a reason for Agnes to cry. She just slowly brought her face back to his. He was half smiling, just like Daddy. I don't want to hear another fucking word out of your mouth until there's a dinner on that fucking table. Redzer walked to the table quickly. He slapped his hand on it. Here, right here, on this table, my fucking table, right? Agnes didn't speak. She went to the cooker and prepared a fry. He turned on the radio and fiddled with the knob until the racing and football results were coming through loud and clear. That night, Agnes went around to her mother. She had to tell someone. She recounted the story as her mother was ironing her father's shirts. Throughout the story, her mother barely looked up. When Agnes had finished, she awaited some gem of advice or even sympathy from her mother. Slowly her mother looked up, and in her eyes Agnes saw a surrendered spirit. Well, love, you've made your bed. Now lie in it, said her ma. Agnes never told anyone again, but over time she learned how to avoid the beatings. She also established an unspoken but well-understood law with Redzer. She did this with a look, the way only a woman can, and the look said, I can take it, but don't ever touch my children. Redzer never did. The May sunshine cut like a blade down Dublin's Moor Street. The fishwives cursed the swarming flies, and Agnes Browne sat by her stall and reflected on the 3 months that had passed since Redzer's death. Her first Easter as a widow had come and gone. She now collected her weekly pension along with her fuel voucher for 2 free bags of turf. The children had settled a bit, although Mark seemed to be uneasy, fidgety, a bee up his arse, her mother would have called it. Maybe it was the penny for your thoughts. A voice cut across her reflection. It was Marion, carrying 2 mugs of Bovril. What? Your thoughts, a penny for them. You were miles away. Yes, Mark. What about him? He's not himself. Is he sick? Has he a temperature? Ah, no, he's as healthy as a pup. No, it's something else. What? I don't know, I'm telling you. If I knew, I wouldn't be worried, would I? Hey, look, grab your woman. She's looking at your bananas. Oh, Jesus, here, hold me mug. Marion hurried over to her stall, where a lady was indeed examining Marion's wares. Can I help you, love? No, just looking, thanks. Oh, they love that, they do. The woman looked at Marion, who was barely visible on the other side of the stall. I beg your pardon? She asked. Bananas? They love it when you look at them. The woman held a stare, not knowing how to answer Marion's statement. She blinked and went back to the bananas. She picked up a bunch of 6, turned them this way and that, and then replaced them. They look a bit pale, she remarked. Yes, answered Marion. They're probably just dizzy. They had a rough crossing from Jamaica. The woman stared again at Marion, then moved on awkwardly. Marion scurried back to Agnes and took her Bovril back. You do scare them off, said Agnes. Ah, me yarse. Either she wants bananas or she doesn't. I'm not going to play 20 bleeding questions. She was poking them and squeezing them. They're bananas, not Mickeys. They don't get any better if you squeeze them. The 2 women erupted in laughter. Oh, Marion, you're a tonic. They both sipped their Bovril and watched the passing shoppers. Marion turned to Agnes and was about to speak, but stopped, as if she was trying to find the words. Agnes waited. What is it? She blurted out finally. What do you mean? Marion asked innocently. What were you going to say? Nothing. You were, Marion. Now, what was it? Marion prepared to speak, and Agnes waited. Do you miss it? Marion asked finally. What? Miss what? You know. It. The queer thing. Yeah, the queer thing. Agnes thought for a moment and took a sip of Bovril. Nah. Are you serious? Not even a little bit? Nope, not even a teeny bit. I mean, what's the bleeding miss? The smell of chips and Guinness being breathed all over you. His chin like bleeding sandpaper scraping off your shoulder and neck. And then the weight and the worry. Am I gone again? But making love, Agnes. Love me arse. Making babies. Making worries. Making shitty nappies. Making him happy. And you. Making you happy too. You can't say you never enjoyed it. Marion, will you get a grip? Enjoy what? You know. The organism. There was a moment's silence in deference to this magical modern-day word. Agnes sipped her Bovril and Marion glanced around sheepishly as if she'd just spoken a national secret. I've never done one, Agnes said defiantly. I don't think they exist. They do, I swear, Aggie, I done two. What? When? 1 2 weeks after your Redder's funeral on a Friday, and one last August. Are you sure they were organisms? Positive. Agnes sipped her Bovril again, and Marion just sat glowing with the memory of her last statement. What were they like? Massive. Brilliant. Be Pacific. Ascribe it. Marion pulled the crate she was using as a seat closer to Agnes. Agnes reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a pack of Player's Navy Cut, and they both lit up. Marion took a drag, removed a piece of tobacco from her tongue with a spit, and slowly exhaled. Agnes waited expectantly. Well, first I didn't know what was going on. He was really drunk, so it was taking him longer than usual. He was bouncing away, up and down, up and down. No, I know that bit. Get to the point, Agnes interrupted. Oh, right. Well, I was thinking to myself, if this fella doesn't evacuate soon, he'd fall asleep. The next thing, I had this feeling. A wave came over me, like getting 10 early marks at the bingo, and you just know something good is coming. A shiver ran through me body. Me hips started jerking all on their own. I closed my eyes, and it was like an explosion. I could see colours bursting in me mind, like someone set off fireworks. Without me telling it to, me mouth let out a little... He stopped and said, Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I could hardly speak. Keep going, I kind of whispered, but he just rolled over and said, You're all right. I wasn't in the humour anyway. He was asleep in minutes. I just lay there. And I don't know why, but after a while I started to cry. I wasn't sad or nothing. I just cried. Gas, isn't it? That was it. So what do you think? Agnes sat open-mouthed. Marion took another drag and again glanced around to be sure nobody was within earshot. Agnes was in deep thought. Was that the first one or the second one? Both. They were nearly the same, except on the second one I didn't cry. Did you tell him about them? Oh, no way. Are you kidding? He'd say I had worms or something. Anyway, tell him and it'll be all over the docks in no time. Yeah, you're right. How long did he last? Oh, just a couple of seconds. Over in a flash. Jesus, I could have had one, Marion, and not noticed it if they're that quick. Oh, no, Agnes. Believe you me, if you had one, you'd notice it, for sure. Here, I'm off. Marion took the 2 mugs and went back to her stall. Within seconds, her familiar cry could be heard all down Moore Street. 10p a pound, a half to the hard tomatoes. Agnes sat and pondered Marion's story, and the enthusiasm with which she told it. Just before standing up to add her own sales cry to the Moore Street melody, Agnes's thoughts were, well, fuck you, reds or brown. leaving me with 7 orphans and not one organism to show for it. The Browne children were as diverse as it was possible to be. Although they'd been loved almost equally by Agnes and ignored equally by Redzer, they each developed an individual personality. Mark, the eldest at 14 years of age, was really the apple of his mother's eye. Like a lot of Dublin firstborn children, he spent his early years living with his granny. A big, strong lad, Mark was not afraid of hard work. He loved to fetch and carry and would do anything he thought would please his mother. Mark was never to have his mother to himself as he grew up, with babies arriving in the house year after year after year. This Mark considered normal, and from the time he was 6 years of age, he was changing nappies and cleaning up after his younger brothers and sister. With the younger ones constantly pestering him, Mark never really appreciated babies. That was until after the gap between 1957 and 1964, when Agnes, for the first time in Mark's life, was not pregnant. He enjoyed this time and marvelled at how beautiful his mother was without the bump she always seemed to have. Then, of course, in September 1964, along came Trevor. An unexpected interruption in Mark's life, whom Mark hated before he was born. But once home, Mark doted upon. For the first time, Mark really felt like a big brother. Now, with the death of Redzer, Mark would have to fill the vacancy of man at the house. In many ways, Mark was ready for it. The Jarrow had no such thing as a playground. There were no specific areas for children to go and entertain themselves, with the result that children made their own areas and their own entertainment. There was no park in the Jarrow, so football was played on the streets. 2 piles of coats would be put down for goals, and the goalkeeper's area estimated by the players. Each player, of course, had his own idea of distance, so whether the goalkeeper was inside or outside of his area gave rise to the most animated of arguments, and even punch-ups. With England winning the World Cup the previous year, and World Cup Willie instilling a fever in young Dublin boys, football occupied most of the boys' time. Matches would be played in every lane, back street or main road, at all times of the day. Mark loved soccer, and now at 14 he was captain of the City Celtic under-15s football team. He was football mad. When he wasn't working at one of his part-time jobs, Mark trained for or played football. Up to now, that was his whole life. Dermot, on the other hand, preferred boxing. The local curate, Father Quinn, had set up the Jarrow Boxing Club, or the Backstreet Bashers as they call themselves, and Dermot was one of its first members. Dermot was not a tall lad, but for his size he was strong, and he had a heart like a lion. He was one of Father Quinn's star boxers. Inside the ring or outside, Dermot was renowned as a great scrapper. Even boys some years senior to Dermot would be wary of taking on this little tiger. Frankie preferred neither boxing nor soccer, just liked hanging around with the local gurriers and the ne'er-do-wells. Frankie was one of those kids that had the knack of getting everybody into trouble, but never getting into trouble himself. He would lead from behind, always coming out of tricky situations with his hands spotlessly clean, while those around him paid the price. It was clear from an early age that Frankie Browne would end up either a millionaire or in prison. In the Jarrow, the girls played skipping or chasing, and their agility at both was surprising. During daylight hours, chasing was for girls only, but in the evenings it was played by both girls and boys, and became kiss chasing. Now, the rules of kiss chasing were simple. The boys would chase the girls, and when a girl was caught, she must kiss the boy that caught her. Girls who were champion runners during the day ran a little less fast at night, depending, of course, on who was doing the chasing. Mind you, there were some girls who could walk around at a snail's pace and would never be caught. Mark and Dermot were good chasers. Both were handsome young boys and had no trouble catching any girl they chose to chase. Frankie never played. He preferred to spend his evenings playing poker with the other gamblers under the street lamp. He was a good poker player and rarely lost, which naturally made him unpopular. Rory liked kiss chasing but found himself confused. He never knew whether to chase the boys or run with the girls. Often he simply gave up and went home to play with his dress dolls. In every family there are children with minor afflictions. And unfortunately for Dermot's twin brother Simon, he had them all. On top of a stammer, he also had a lazy eye, with the result that when playing kiss chasing, Simon would seem to be looking one way and running the other. And when he did catch a girl, by the time he got out, give me a kiss, the girl he had caught had got bored and gone off. To solve his lazy eye problem, the eye doctor in the clinic had given Simon a pair of glasses with a leather patch over one eyepiece. But instead of straightening out his eye, Simon now turned his head sideways, which gave the impression that he was hard of hearing, which he wasn't. If he went to the local shop on errands for his mother, Simon would turn his head sideways to the assistant when asked what he wanted, and stammer out his request. Simon spent his early childhood with shop assistants roaring at him and talking to him in sign language, thinking he was deaf. Kathy was the only girl in the Browne family, and unlike a lot of single girls in big families, Kathy wasn't a tomboy. She was dainty, pleasant, and terribly pretty, if a little unimaginative. For imagination, Kathy depended on her best friend, another Kathy, Kathy Dowdall. It was Kathy Dowdall who came up with the ideas, like the one she had of collecting door-to-door for a wreath for the late Mrs. Smith. The fact that Mrs. Smith was alive and well didn't bother Kathy Dowdall. The two girls collected £2.10 and had a rare old time for a couple of weeks. So, these were the children of Agnes and the late Reds Browne. Through size alone, the family was tightly knit. They would fight like cats and dogs at home and call each other names, but outside the house they stuck together like glue. The rule in the Browne family was, you hit one, you hit seven. Since March 29th and Red's demise, little had changed in the Browne house. If anything, the house was less tense, and for a short time the children enjoyed being the poor little orphans of the Jarrow. But that soon wore off, and life went back to as near normal as possible. Pity was short-lived in an area that faced tragedy from day to day. "Mammy!" Dermot called as he burst into the flat. "Ma!" he called again, now moving swiftly into the kitchenette. Agnes sat at the kitchen table with Trevor in her lap. Trevor was slurping up bread and sugar with hot milk poured over it, a mixture locally called goody, which was his breakfast. Dermot stood before Agnes, a look of anguish on his face, his legs tight together and one hand firmly on his bottom. He was squirming. "What's wrong with you, love?" Agnes asked him. "Me gick is coming." "Well, what are you telling me for? Do I look like the gick collector? Go into the toilet and do your gick." "We can't. Mark is in there." "Well, tell him to come out." "Mark!" she yelled. "Get out of that toilet and let your brother do his gick." There was no reply. "Mark!" she yelled again. Still no reply. "He's in there ages, ma. He won't come out," cried Dermot. Agnes got up. "Here, Rory, feed Trevor." She walked to the landing where the toilet was, followed by Dermot, who at this stage was holding his bum so tight that only his thumb was visible. When she arrived at the toilet door, she listened first before banging on it. "Mark, are you in there?" For a moment it seemed that there would be no reply. Then there was a very quiet, "Yeah." "Well, come out. Your brother's in agony here, and if he shits in those trousers, I'll make you wear them tomorrow." There was a click, and the door opened a crack. It was enough for Dermot. He bolted through with his pants halfway down his legs. Even as Mark was closing the door behind him, a groan of relief could be heard from Dermot. Mark, eyes down, walked past his mother and made straight for his bedroom, closing the door behind him. Agnes followed him as far as the door, and when it closed against her, she stood for a moment and thought. What's wrong with him?" she asked of no one in particular. Simon just looked at her and shrugged. Rory was too busy getting the last of the goody into Trevor. "Maybe he has worms," Katty offered. "Don't be so disgusting, you," Agnes said. "People do get worms in their gick, Mammy. Katty Dowdall told me, and they do be miles long." "Shut up that talk about worms, and you stay away from that Katty Dowdall one. She's a bad affluence. Browns don't get worms, and that's that." All went quiet again. Agnes gently rapped on the door of the boy's bedroom. "Mark, Mark, Mark." "Janie, ma, you sound like a dog with a hare lip," Dermot announced as he re-entered the flat looking much relieved. Agnes made a swipe at him. "I'll hare lip you in a minute." "What did you say to your brother?" "Me, I didn't say anything." "You must have said something," Agnes insisted. "I said, come on, Mark, me gick is coming. That's all." "Then why is he depressed?" "It's not me. It's his Willie." announced Dermot. The other children giggled. Who? Who's this Willie fella? Has Mark been fighting? With this, the whole group erupted into laughter, and even Trevor joined in. Rory's face turned crimson, and Simon had tears in his eyes. Agnes was furious. "Stop that!" she screamed. The laughter died suddenly, but the children were bursting to let it loose. However, seeing their mother so angry, they all held it admirably. Agnes scanned their faces. When she felt she had everybody's undivided attention, she went on with her train of thought. "Now, one of yous is going to tell me where I'll find this Willie." Cheeks were puffing, tongues were being bitten, and tears were streaming down Simon's face, who, even though not making a sound, was shaking with held laughter. The children thought they were going to hang on until Agnes announced, "When I find him, I'll choke him." The burst of laughter could be heard on every floor in every flat of that building in James Larkin Court. Dermot ran out of the building howling. Rory went into hysterics, so much so that Trevor began to cry with fright. Cathy followed Dermot out the door, and Simon buried his face in a cushion on the settee. Agnes swept Trevor up into one arm. With the other she picked up the spoon that Rory had been using to feed the baby and boinked Rory on the head. Simon, who had nearly stopped laughing, roared again. Agnes went to the cupboard and pulled out the baby's coat. After silencing his cries with the insertion of a soother, she put the coat on the child and turned to the other two boys. "Now, yous can take him off for a walk. Rory, get the go-car down the steps, and you, Simon, take him." She handed the child to Simon. She then went to her handbag and fished out her purse. She gave some money to Rory. "Bring me back some Tide and a pound of broken biscuits. Now go on, off with yous." The two boys scurried out the door, and as they made their way down to the ground floor, Rory said something to Simon, and the laughter started again. Agnes slammed the door. "Little bastards, having a funny half hour at my expense." The flat now went quiet as a butcher's shop on a Friday. Agnes went to the radiogram and put on an LP. Cliff Richard, of course. She went to the bedroom door again and was about to knock, but decided to leave it. Mark would come out in his own good time. Instead, she began to tidy up and dust the little flat, sailing across the room on the musical waves provided by Cliff's voice. She opened the cupboard to return the duster, just as Cliff began a soft, slow song. With the cupboard door open, she stood for a moment and imagined what it must be like to be married to Cliff. Those twinkling bright eyes that smile all the time, his coal-black hair falling across his tanned face as she ruffled his quiff. Without realising it, she was running her hand through the dark grey strands of her upturned floor mop. When she noticed this, she giggled to herself and said to the mop, "Oh, I'm sorry, Cliff." And with a swift brush of her hand, she cleared the quiff out of the mop's eyes. She took the mop from the cupboard and began to slowly lurch around the room. She closed her eyes. Suddenly she was in the ballroom of the Savoy Hotel in London. Cliff had just collected yet another award, the one for being the most handsome, talented and loving singer in the universe. He had thanked the audience and stepped from the stage. He walked through the thronging crowd and stopped by the table where Agnes was sitting. Without speaking, he placed the award on the table and extended his hand to Agnes. Coyly she stood, and as the flashbulbs popped and the lights swirled, Cliff began to sing softly into her ear. The crowd parted, and alone on the dance floor, Agnes and Cliff were the couple of the century, as they floated around the dance floor. Had a stranger walked into the flat at that moment, they would have seen an attractive, dark-haired, smiling woman moving in slow circles, hugging a damp, shaggy mop. They could not be faulted for wondering if it might be a good idea to call the home for the demented. This is what Mark saw as he stood by the bedroom door. The music came to a halt, and Agnes opened her eyes and noticed Mark. She was both startled and embarrassed at the same time. "My God, you gave me a scare," she muttered, and quickly went to the cupboard, replaced the mop and closed the door. Mark didn't move. Agnes sat down at the kitchen table. "Sit down, Mark," she said gently. He did so, sullenly, sliding onto the chair. "Are you all right, love? You seem to be upset. Tell me what it is, and sure, maybe I can help. Are you having a problem?" "Yeah," he answered with his head bowed. "Well, tell your mammy. Come on, love. What kind of problem?" "A Willie one." "And who's Willie?" "My Willie." "What do you mean, your Willie? Is he your pal?" Mark looked up at his mother. Maybe she really was going potty. "Me Willie," What I used to do me pee, he said, now pointing down at his pants. Agnes panicked. She jumped up from the table and put the gas on under the kettle. Tea sounded like a good idea. It had never entered her head that she might have to explain to her sons what other uses a willy might have. With her back to Mark, she calmly said, I see. She sat down again. And, what's the problem? Is it sore? No, Mark answered without the elaboration that Agnes was hoping for. Is it itchy? She asked, not knowing why she was asking such a stupid question, but probably in the hopes that Mark would take the initiative and begin to explain. No. Well, tell your mammy, what's wrong with your willy? There's hair growing on it. Again Mark lowered his head and actually looked as if he was talking to his willy. Is that all? Oh, that's all right, son. Agnes was relieved. A simple answer would put him right here. That happens to all boys around your age. It's the start of becoming a man. All young boys get hair on their willy. Agnes was smiling as she spoke, and Mark was looking at her. His expression was one of relief. Agnes was pleased with herself. She was a modern woman, she thought. Her son had asked her a very personal question, and she was able to answer it without a hitch. But then came the dreaded follow-up question. Why? Agnes thought the modern woman here would say, it's called puberty. Soon your penis will be erect, and you will have dreams at night which will cause your penis to discharge a creamy, thick fluid. This is called semen, and it's what fertilises the egg in a woman's fallopian tubes and makes babies. Agnes stared into the face of her eldest baby. His eyes awaited her answer. The modern woman went out the window. That's to keep your willy warm when you go swimming. She jumped up to the steaming kettle, and over her shoulder she said, Now, out with you. It was the town hall, community centre, entertainment complex and political debating arena, all rolled into one. To the 16,000 or so population of the Jarrow, Foley's Select Lounge and Bar was the centre of the universe. Agnes would drop into Foley's bar maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and always on a Friday night, when she and Marion would down a couple after the bingo. The Friday night chats were important to the women. The subjects were many and varied, and ranged from how Agnes's children were progressing at school to who was bonking whom in the area. Tonight they began with a discussion as to whether or not the priests down in the St. Anthony's Hall were fiddling the bingo. After some probing statements, the women decided that they were just having a run of bad luck. There was a lull in the conversation. Both women took a sup of drink and glanced around the bar. Marion produced 2 cigarettes and they lit up. Agnes spotted a couple of lads from the fish market and gave them a wave. Who are they? Marion asked. Nippard and Herden from the Fisher, Agnes replied. They seem nice enough. Ah, they are nice lads, a bit wild, but all right. Do none of them ever ask you out? Will you go away with yourself, Marion? Do you want me to be charged with baby snatching? I don't mean them, Agnes. Any of the fellas down there. Some of them do, but Jesus, Marion, I wouldn't be bothered, I wouldn't. Well, you're mad. For God's sake, Agnes, you're only young. You could marry again. You should. Marion, will you feck off? What hero would take on 7 childer? And anyway, I'm not sure I'd want to. Lord rest him, but I swear I've had a better life since Redder died. I have. You need a man? I don't. We all do. Well, I don't. Organisms or no organisms, I don't. That statement brought another lull to the conversation. It was Agnes who broke the silence. Did you have any more? I knew you were going to ask me that. I shouldn't have told you. I'm only asking. I don't want to sour the details of your love life. I was interested, that's all. There followed another lull, a puff of a fag, a glance around, a sup of drink, and then Agnes looked into Marion's face. Well, did you? No. I'm giving them up. After 2? Why? I'm not feeling well since I had them. And I'm after getting a lump. A lump? What kind of a lump? Where? Marion blushed slightly. She glanced around the room, furtively, to check that nobody was paying any undue attention to their table. When she was sure, she opened her coat and placed her left finger on a spot between her right breast and her armpit. Just there. She closed her coat quickly, picked up her glass of stout, and as she supped it, she glanced around the room again to be sure nobody was watching. "On your diddy?" Agnes was aghast. "Shh, for fuck's sake, Agnes. Do you want to take an advert in the bleeding paper?" "Sorry." "On your diddy?" Agnes's voice had dropped to a hoarse whisper. "Yep." "What did Dr. Clegg say it was?" I didn't go." "Why not?" "Because if this lump is caused by me having them organisms, I'd be scarlet. That's why." "Don't be stupid. He's a doctor. He knows all about organisms. Wouldn't bother him." "Do you think so?" "I'm sure of it. We'll get Fat Annie to mind the 2 stalls, and I'll go down with you." "Oh, would you, Agnes?" "Oh, you're a pal. I'll tell you, it's sore. Some days I can hardly lift my arm." "It's probably just a cyst, love. That's it." Agnes sounded sure. "Yeah, probably." Marion was relieved. "Mr. Foley, same again, please. And 2 packets of nuts." Life was taking an upswing for Mark, and his interest in girls was beginning to dominate his waking and sleeping hours. Rory's interests, however, were confusing for him. What he liked most about girls was their clothes, the feel of nylons, and he longed to try out their makeup. In school, the other boys called him Sissy, but not to his face. All of the other boys knew that Rory, Sissy or not, was still a Browne, and you don't take on the Brownes. This protection was not afforded, not directly anyway, to Cathy, being the only Browne girl in the girls' school. She attended the Mother of Divine Providence girls' school in Riders Row. It was a strict school, run by nuns. For 10 years of age, Cathy was a bright child. She was also well liked by her classmates. Cathy was very pretty. Her shoulder-length raven black hair always had a shine, as did her large brown eyes that were barely visible beneath the fringe that always needed to be brushed aside. Indeed, it was this hairstyle that was to lead to the incident that would later be referred to as the case of the fringe and the nun. That day, Monday, had started badly for Cathy. She awoke to Mark's call that it was 8 o'clock. The warm June sun exploded into the room when Mark pulled the curtains back. "Get up, Cathy," Mark yelled. I'm up," she replied sleepily, trying to bury herself beneath the blankets. "You're not up. Now come on, get up." He yanked the blankets off the bed, leaving her lying on the bare bed in her nightdress. "Oh, Marco," she cried. Nothing. Now come on, Cathy, get up." Mark made sure everyone was up before he left the house for school. He'd been up himself since 5 o'clock with his mother, as he was every morning. He would do his milk round with Larry Boyle from 5:15 to 6:30. Then it was around to McCabe's shop. He'd pick up 50 papers and run on his paper round, arriving back to the flat about 7:30 or so, have a porridge breakfast and get the others up, before he left for school at 8:15. Although the school was only 10 minutes away, he had to leave early to drop Trevor to his Granny Redden in Sean McDermott Street. Granny Redden would mind the 3-year-old until Mrs. Browne picked him up that evening. Cathy rummaged through the underwear drawer. No knickers. She rummaged through the boys' drawer. Mammy often threw knickers in there by mistake. Nope, no knickers. She wandered out to the bathroom. The clothes horse was full, and right enough there was a pair of knickers on it, but they were damp. She stood for a moment, scratching her head. It's a pair of pinnies today, she thought. Pinnies were a pair of her mother's knickers, the slack gathered to the front and tied together with a nappy pin. This kept the knickers from falling down or drooping. It looked awful, but it worked, and they kept her arse warm. After a slice of toast, Cathy left for school in her pinnies. She skipped through the early morning inner city traffic, and at the corner of Cathedral Street met up with Anne Redden, her cousin. The two had then headed up to Moore Street and Agnes's stall. Cathy liked to call there every morning on her way to school. Agnes had her daughter's lunch ready for her, a sandwich of strawberry jam and a piece of fruit. She gave her daughter the once over and then sent her on her way. Cathy would eat the fruit at her first break and keep the sandwich for her big break, when she would be given a tiny free bottle of milk provided by the state. With a little bit of sunshine, the sisters had turned off the heating, and the classroom was a bit chilly as Cathy and her 32 classmates stood to recite Hail Mary in Irish. After the Amen, they all said the sign of the cross aloud and sat down. Sister Magdalene spoke. The doctor will be giving all of you a general examination today. However, we shall not let that interfere with our lessons or our preparation for all of you for Holy Sacrament of Confirmation. You will leave the classroom in groups of 5. You may strip in the cloakroom down to your knickers and then wait quietly on the seats outside the tea room until you're called. There's to be no, listen carefully, no talking. When you have finished with the doctor, dress and return to the class quickly and quietly. Is that clear? There was a chorus of, yes, Sister Magdalene. Kathy, however, was not one of the chorus. She had gone pale. Strip? She thought in a panic. Stripped to the knickers? She was light-headed. The nappy pin holding up her mother's knickers felt like an anchor. She began to blush. Her hands began to shake. She stared at the crucifix. Please, Jesus, help me. Don't make me take off my clothes. Please, Jesus, do something. Sister Magdalene was speaking again. You 5 will go first, and we shall go anti-clockwise from then on. She was pointing to the row of desks nearest the door. Kathy counted the seats in groups of 5 up to where she was sitting. She would be in the 4th group. She had to buy time. She had to get a seat that would put her in the last group. She would then have a chance to sneak out during big break, which lasted 35 minutes. This would be enough time to get home, dunk the pennies, and change into her own knickers, which would be dry by now. And even if they weren't, better a damp pair than to be called droopy drawers for the rest of her school days and beyond. At the 11 o'clock break, she went into action. During the 10-minute break, she had approached all 13 girls who would be in the final 3 groups. She offered her fruit, her sandwich, her milk, but to no avail. By 11:15, she was back in class in the same seat where she had begun the day. Sister Magdalene instructed the girls to take out their catechism, and the learning of answers to Archbishop McQuaid's questions began in earnest. At 11:20, there was a gentle rap at the door. Sister Magdalene crossed the room, her crucifix dangling from her waist, and opened the door. There followed a murmuring through the half-open door, and the good sister re-entered the room and announced, "All right, girls, the doctor's ready for you. The first group, off you go." The first 5 victims rose slowly. It was as if they were bound for execution. They huddled together and trooped out the door. The lessons continued. "Who is God?" Sister Magdalene boomed. "God is our Father in heaven, the Creator and Lord of all things," they all sang back. Kathy watched the clock. The time ticked by. "What is the Blessed Trinity?" boomed Sister Magdalene, this time her long, pale finger pointing at Kathy. Kathy stood up. "There are—" "Stop! 3, I said stop, Kathy Browne." Kathy stopped and peered at the teacher through her fringe. The nun walked slowly towards her. "How many times do I have to repeat myself to you?" She glared at Kathy. Kathy didn't know how to answer this question. The nun's arms shot out from under her bib, and she held them out as if she were ready to be nailed to a cross. "Do I look like a parrot to you?" Kathy was tempted to answer, "No, sister, a penguin," but she knew better. "I asked you, Miss Browne, do I look like a parrot?" "No." "I beg your pardon?" "No, Sister Magdalene." "Good. So you know that I do not intend to tell you each and every day to get that hair out of your eyes, do I?" "No, Sister Magdalene." "Well, do it!" the sister screamed, and the whole class jumped. Kathy put her hand to her forehead, and with a flick of her head, the hair flew back to leave her beautiful but now frightened eyes bare. The sister smiled. "Good. Now, what is the Blessed Trinity?" "There are 3 divine persons in the one God, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost." The door opened, and the first 5 victims were back. "Sit down, Miss Browne," Sister Magdalene said as she walked away from Kathy. Kathy sat, and her fringe dropped down again. She looked at the clock. 20 to 12. Christ, she thought, 20 minutes. That's not long enough. At this rate, Kathy would be stripped before the big break. Don't panic, she told herself. Maybe the next group will be longer. They weren't. They were back in class before 12 o'clock. At 16 minutes past 12, the 3rd group returned. It was time. Kathy's group rose. She was shaking as she walked out. The corridor was empty, and the 5 went without a word to the cloakroom to strip. Kathy undid the leather straps on her sandals and slowly began to remove them. Her breath was coming in short gasps. As she pulled off her socks, the tears began to well up in her eyes. Suddenly, a woman came into the room. She was a pretty woman, not a magazine model, but pretty. To Kathy, she was an angel, for she said, "I'm sorry, girls, the doctor's going on his lunch break, so go back to your class and you will be the first after lunch." Kathy was the first to be dressed. She returned to the classroom, and as one of the group explained to Sister Magdalene what had happened, Kathy stared at the giant but sad Jesus and whispered, "Thank you." The schoolyard was filled with screeches and yelps as the 200-plus girls enjoyed the big break. In the middle of the yard, a skipping rope was turning and a group were singing "Down in the Valley Where the Green Grass Grows." These were the third-class girls. The fourth and fifth-class girls were bouncing balls up against the side of a bike shed singing "Plainy Packet of Rinso," while the sixth-class girls were giggling and talking about sixth-class boys and who had kissed who. Kathy Browne was oblivious to all of this as she stood behind the bike shed and plotted her escape. Her only comrade, her cousin Anne. "Why do you have to go home?" asked Anne. "I just have to, that's all. Now will you bend over?" Anne bent over beside the railings to be Kathy's step up onto the top. Kathy stretched her leg up and gripped the railings. A 1, a 2, and Kathy stumbled, because Anne straightened again. "But if you're caught, you'll be killed," Anne announced. "Anne Redden, if you don't bend over and stay bent, I'll give you such a kick in the hole that me shoe'll come out your mouth." Kathy was angry. Anne bent over. But even as Kathy was standing on her back, Anne was still talking. "If you're caught, you better leave me out of this," she grunted as Kathy pushed off her back and clambered over the railing. Kathy's feet had barely touched the ground when she took off, running flat out for home. Within 10 minutes, she was standing on the landing outside the flat. She pushed open the letterbox and tugged the piece of wool that hung across it. She pulled the wool out, and bit by bit, the door key made its way to the opening. She quickly slid the key into the lock and opened the door. She ran to the sink. The knickers were dry. She changed into them rapidly, discarded the pennies. In less than 2 minutes, she was bouncing down the stairs to the street. Kathy arrived back at the school, panting and perspiring. The children were still in the yard. She'd made it. Or had she? She had no way back in. How could she have been so stupid? She hid in the doorway of the butcher shop next to the school's main gate, a locked gate. The only person that had a key to that was the principal, her teacher, Sister Magdalene. A car slowly passed her and stopped at the gate. The wine-coloured car was polished and gleamed in the afternoon sun. A man stepped from the car. It was the doctor. He fished in his pocket and took out a key. Kathy saw a ray of hope. She stooped low and scurried along the plinth of the railing until she got to the gate pillar. The doctor was fiddling with the lock. Kathy's mind screamed, "Please, don't look over here. Doctor, please, please." The doctor didn't look over, but as the lock clicked open, he spoke, as if to the gate. "Wait until I am back in the car, and then walk along the side of it as I drive in. I'll drive slowly." Kathy was stunned. The doctor pushed open the 2 large gates, and as he walked back to the driver's door, he looked straight at Kathy, smiled and winked. Just before he sat back in the car, he said, "Home to change your knickers then." Kathy was gobsmacked. He was a mind reader. He wasn't, of course. But he'd been doing the school rounds for 15 years. He knew the story. The car moved slowly. Kathy crouched, held onto the door handle, and crept beside it. As the doctor was locking the gates, Kathy was already halfway across the yard. She looked back at him, and he was still smiling. She waved. He nodded. The bell rang. Kathy put her tongue out as far as it would go. The doctor pressed the lollipop stick down on the back of it and shone his light right down her throat. "And again," he said. "Ah!" "Good." He removed the stick, and between his thumb and the palm of his hand, he snapped the stick in two and dropped it into the waste bin. He wrote a note in his book and patted her on the head. "Okay, my little escapee, you're fine. Back to your class." Kathy hopped off the chair and made for the door. She placed her hand on the door handle and stopped. She turned, still holding the handle, and said, "Doctor." He had his back to her, but turned. "Yes?" With her left hand, she brushed back her fringe and said, "Thanks." He smiled. "My pleasure. And hey, Nice knickers. Cathy giggled and left the room. She went to the cloakroom to dress. She'd not been back to the classroom since the big break, as she and the other 4 girls had come straight to the doctor. As she dressed, she reflected on how things had worked out so well, and that life was indeed worth living. What she did not know was that after the break, when Cathy's cousin Anne did not see her return, she got scared. As soon as the class was seated, Anne timidly raised her hand, and when Sister Magdalene asked what was the matter, Anne tearfully confessed all. The cat was well and truly out of the bag. As Cathy entered the classroom, she noticed a definite air of impending disaster. She did not, however, suspect that this had anything to do with her. She took her seat. Sister Magdalene said nothing to her, but carried on with the English lesson that was in progress. All was normal for the time being, although Cathy noticed a few peculiar looks from classmates. The bell rang through the corridors to end the day's schooling, and Sister Magdalene issued her instructions. Don't forget questions 65 to 70 tonight. We'll be doing them first thing in the morning. Oh, and Miss Browne, you stay after school. I wish to speak to you. The class stood and said the Hail Mary aloud. Only the girl standing next to Cathy Browne heard the tremor in her voice. The classroom was soon empty and deathly quiet. Cathy sat alone at her desk. Sister Magdalene had, as usual, walked her girls down to the front door in single file and would return at any moment. Cathy heard the clack-clack of Sister Magdalene's heels coming towards the room, and the fear tasted like a rusty nail in her mouth. The nun entered. She closed the door and walked to her desk. She didn't look at Cathy. Instead, she opened the top drawer of her desk. In this drawer was a Bible, a roll book used to mark the daily attendance of each pupil, a dash for present and a circle for absent, a box of blackboard chalk, and the Wrath of God. The Wrath of God was a strip of leather 1.5 inches wide, 1 inch thick, and 12 inches long. Somebody, somewhere, had sat over a drawing board and designed this strip specifically for beating children. It served no other purpose. It was expensive to make and to buy. The nun did not take it out. Instead, she placed her hand on it in the drawer. She still didn't look at Cathy. Her eyes were firmly on the Wrath of God. She took a deep breath, and as she exhaled, she said, Miss Browne, do I like lies? No, Sister Magdalene. Cathy knew what the nun was holding. And do I like liars? No, Sister Magdalene. A tear fell down Cathy's cheek. Come up here, the nun said as she whipped out the strap and slammed it on the desk. Cathy walked unsteadily to the front of the room. The nun was glaring at her now. What do liars get? She asked in a low, husky voice. Cathy bowed her head and mumbled, Speak up, girl, the nun screamed. Cathy jumped with fright. The tears were now streaming down her cheeks and dripping from her quivering chin. Her long fringe was damp and stuck to her cheeks. The wrath of God. The wrath of God, the nun repeated. So do not lie to me here, she pointed to the crucifix, before God our Saviour. The nun now seemed to be shaking as much as Cathy. Hold out your hand, she said, as if telling Cathy to sharpen her pencil. The child stretched out her hand and bent her fingers back so that the palm was sticking up. She closed her eyes. Why did you leave the school grounds today? The question was simple, the answer embarrassing. Cathy was afraid to lie before God the Saviour, yet she couldn't tell the truth. It just wouldn't come out. Whack! The pain shot up Cathy's arm and out through her head. Her hand was tingling. I am waiting for an answer, madam, the nun said, and raised her arm again. Cathy opened one eye. The huge dark figure loomed over her, the arm pointing to heaven, the strap flapping like a wild animal's tongue. Cathy withdrew her arm and ran for the door. The nun was startled, but quick enough to catch Cathy before the door was opened. Cathy had now balled her hands into 2 fists and had them under her armpits. The nun gripped her above the elbow and dragged the girl easily along the polished floor to the desk. She threw the strap on the ground, and still holding the child's arm, she rummaged with her free hand in the drawer. I'll teach you, Miss Trollop, she said as her hand came out of the drawer, clutching a pair of chrome scissors. By the time Katty reached home, her tears had stopped. As she entered the noisy flat, Agnes said, "Katty, your dinner's in the pot. Do your homework before you eat it." "Where did you get that bloody thing?" Agnes was pointing at a woolly hat with a tassel that Katty was wearing. It was called a monkey hat, after Mike Nesbitt, one of the band The Monkees, Katty's favourite band. "Anne Redden gave it to me." "Well, it looks stupid," Agnes said, but knowing that kids will be kids, she did not interfere with their fashion whims. "I'm going down to Marion. You be in your bed when I get home." Katty went to her bedroom and cried. There is no such thing as a secret in Moore Street. Within days, news of Marion's visit to the clinic and the doctor's request for her to go into hospital for tests was all over the markets. There was a path worn to Marion's stall by other dealers who had a solution for her illness, or a story of someone they knew with a similar complaint to Marion's that turned out to be nothing. Fat Annie suggested it might be an ingrown boil, and some time was spent by the other dealers discussing how best to get a poultice on the inside. Doreen Dowdall said it could be an extra nipple, for in a James Bond movie she'd seen a man with 3 nipples, and Doreen was convinced it was quite common. Mrs. Robinson said one of her twin daughters, Splish, or was it Splash, had a lump on her breast, and it turned out to be nothing more than a cyst. "It's simple," she said. "All they do is lance it." Bridie Barnes asked, "Does that mean a fellow with a suit of armour runs at it with a spear?" All the girls laughed, including Marion. In general, Marion's problem was treated as a simple matter, and nobody really worried about it, except Marion. Agnes had convinced herself that it would turn out to be nothing, and that Marion would soon be back to her old self, once the tests were done and the results were in. Agnes decided that she herself needed a lift, and planned to concentrate on home for a while and get the front room papered and decorated. The opportunity of doing a bit of work in the house perked Agnes up. "There's something about a newly decorated room that puts a woman in good form," she said to herself. Over the next few days, the weather picked up, and the Moore Street market was starting to buzz with life again. Agnes found herself in as good a humour as she'd been in a long time. So it was indeed with a light heart that she went to visit Marion in the Richmond hospital. Marion had been admitted that morning for her tests. Within just 3 hours of her admission, Marion was sitting up in bed, tests completed, and just 24 hours of bed rest ahead of her. Agnes had knocked into Tomo at tea time that day, and Tomo had assured Agnes that Marion was ready for visitors. After feeding the family, Agnes put on a bit of makeup and headed up for the Richmond hospital, just 15 minutes walk away. "Monks, Marion Monks," Agnes said to the porter at the reception desk in the hospital. He flicked through some file pages and ran his finger down a list until the requested name appeared under his nicotine-stained finger. "Monks, Mrs. Marion, St. Catherine's Ward," he announced. "Where's that?" "Through the door, take a right, halfway down the corridor, take a left, 2 flights of stairs up, then straight in, second door on your left." 20 minutes later, and after a grand tour of the hospital, Agnes eventually found the ward. St. Catherine's was a narrow room of about 90 feet long. There were 10 beds along the 2 longer walls, each with an identical iron bedstead and each partnering identical steel bedside lockers. The beds were separated by curtain dividers, which, when Agnes entered, had been pulled back to allow the patients to see the visitors as they entered. Agnes stood inside the doorway and scanned the beds down along the left-hand wall, and the faces of the patients now staring back at her. No sign of Marion. She felt uncomfortable standing there, on show. She turned quickly and repeated the procedure along the right-hand side of the room. 5 beds down, she saw Marion waving furiously. "Agnes! Agnes, over here, love!" Marion called. Quickly, Agnes moved towards Marion's bed, removing her headscarf and running her fingers through her hair as she went. She put the obligatory bottle of Lucozade and packet of 10 cigarettes on the bedside locker and gave Marion a big hug. Sit down," said Marion. Agnes duly sat and pulled the chair a little closer to the bed. "Well, how are you?" Agnes asked, full of concern. "I'm grand. No pain, no uncomfortable feelings. Really, I'm grand." Marion spoke with a smile, and Agnes relaxed. As with all hospital visits, first things come first. Marion pointed to each patient in the ward and described their illness in detail, what their visitors were like, and what their bad habits were. It seemed that everyone else in the ward, except Marion, of course, was a little bit mentally disturbed. Agnes was not surprised that after only a few hours in the ward, Marion had already gathered full case histories on all her ward mates. That was Marion. Eventually the conversation turned to Marion's case again. "Marion," Agnes began hesitantly. "What?" Marion knew there was a hard question coming. "What did they do to you?" "Oh, now," began Marion with authority, as if she had that day begun medical school rather than been a patient. "They done a lumpectomy and a cervical biopsy. Then they test them bits and they find out what's wrong with me." Agnes was leaning with one elbow on the bed and her hand tucked under her chin, marvelling at Marion's grasp of the medical details. "Well, you look marvellous, Marion, really marvellous. I think they cured you." "Ah, no, they haven't even started yet. These are just the tests to find out what's wrong with me. Then they'll cure me." "Oh, I see," said Agnes. Suddenly Marion leaned towards Agnes and spoke in a half-whisper. "Do you know what they done to me?" Agnes pulled her chair even closer to the bed. "What?" "They shaved me." Agnes sat back a little and stared at Marion's face. "They shaved you? Where?" Marion glanced around the ward, coughed, patted herself just below the stomach, at the same time tilting her head sideways. "Down there." "What? Down there?" A few visitors' heads turned towards Marion's bed, and some of the patients leaned forward to see what was going on. Marion's face turned crimson. She nodded politely, smiled at all and sundry, and then through her teeth to Agnes she said, "Agnes, for fuck's sake." "Oh, I'm sorry, Marion." "I don't believe you." "Yep, they shaved me. Baldy. Say you swear." "I swear." "Well, my God." "Marion, give us a look." "I will not." Go on, Marion, give us a look." "No." "Marion Monks, I'm your friend. Now, give us a look." Marion glanced around the ward. "Pull around the curtain," she said. With a swish, the curtain went swiftly round the bed, so the other visitors couldn't see anything. But they could hear, and what they heard was Agnes's voice as she exclaimed, "Oh, my God! Do you know what, Marion? It suits you." And the two women howled with laughter. Agnes left the hospital in an even happier mood than when she had entered it. Marion was in good spirits. She seemed to be well, and there didn't seem to be anything to worry about on that front. With a pep in her step, Agnes Browne was going home to her newly decorated room, where she would make herself a cup of tea and listen to the sweet sound of her children sleeping. Agnes waited in the early morning sunshine by her stall for Cathy to arrive and collect her lunch. She was in a daze. She stared over at Marion's empty stall space with a heavy heart. It was a week now since Marion had gone into hospital and she still wasn't back. It had been late, after 12 the previous night, when Agnes finally left Marion's place for home. Tomo had walked Agnes back to her flat in Larkin Court. Agnes thought nothing of Tomo's offer to walk her home. Little did she know he had a reason for it. He wanted to talk to Agnes out of Marion's earshot. As they strolled down George's Hill in the bright moonlight, Agnes was nattering away about how well Marion was looking and how she knew it would be nothing to worry about. Suddenly Tomo stopped in his tracks. Agnes had walked on a bit before she realised Tomo wasn't by her side. When it dawned on her, she too stopped and turned back to look at him. Tomo stood, his head bowed and his huge form shuddering as he sobbed audibly. Agnes was taken aback. "What's wrong with you, Tomo?" she asked. She's not well, Agnes. She's not well at all." "Well, of course she's not well, Tomo. Any surgery, even minor surgery, takes a lot out of you, and you may as well get used to it, because if they have to take the breast, she'll be feeling down for a good long while." Agnes spoke with authority in the hope that she could lift Tomo's spirits. She didn't. He sobbed louder now and was gasping for breath, so much so that he tried but was unable to speak. "Ah, Tomo, you'll have to get a grip on yourself." Agnes was now standing hands on hips. Tomo just sobbed on. Agnes opened her handbag and rooted out her cigarettes. She lit one hurriedly The smoke from the first straw wafted upwards towards the smiling moon. She dropped the pack back into her bag and clipped it shut. Tomo's sobs were less frantic now, and he was breathing deeply. A young couple, linking arms, passed them. The young girl recognised Agnes. "Good night, Mrs. Browne," the girl said. Agnes smiled at her. Yeah, good night, love. Straight home with you now." The couple chuckled and strolled on. Agnes smiled after them, then turned with a more serious face to Tomo and spoke in a hushed but firm tone. "Will you cop on, Tomo? Standing there sobbing like a big fucking sissy. Anyone would think it was the end of the world." "It is, for me, Agnes," he replied, his voice now deeper after his massive flow of tears. "Why? What's the story?" Even as she asked the question, Agnes knew and dreaded the answer. Her body prepared for it, her knuckles going white around the handbag straps, her chest tightening and her toes curling up as if to try and keep her feet firmly on the ground. Tomo looked back into her eyes and spoke just 2 words. 6 months. As Agnes now stared into the space that was Marion's empty stall spot on this sunny morning, those 2 words echoed in her head. Mammy. A little voice pierced her stupor, and she jumped, startled. It was Katty. "What the feck do you want?" Agnes snapped. "Me lunch." Katty's reply was quiet and puzzled. Agnes bent and hugged her. "I'm sorry, pet. I got a fright. I was miles away. I'm sorry." Agnes let the child out of her tighter than usual hug, but held on to her shoulders. She smiled into Katty's face. "You look lovely, chicken. Except for that bloody woolly hat," and with that she pulled the hat off the child's head. Katty tried to pull it back on, but it was too late. Her mother saw the damage. Agnes said nothing for a few seconds. She just stared at the child open-mouthed. Katty hung her head. Where's your fringe?" Agnes asked. The question came out as if the child had mislaid it. "Gone," Katty answered. "I can see it's gone. I'm not Ray fucking Charles. Where's it gone? How did it go?" "Me sister cut it off." "You haven't got a sister, unless you count Rory." "No, me teacher's sister, Sister Magdalene. She cut it off." Tears now welled up in Katty's eyes. "But why?" Agnes said with agony in her voice. She too now had a watery gaze. "'Cause I was bold." It was all too much for Katty. She broke into tears. Agnes hugged her only daughter tightly. She used the traditional cure, tapping Katty's back and whispering in her ear, "There, there, there." When she calmed down, Katty recounted the whole story to her mother. When Katty had finished, Agnes smiled at her. "Not to worry, love. Listen, next Saturday you and me will go into the hairdresser's and get a style put in that head of yours that would make Lulu jealous. All right, love?" Katty threw herself into her mother's arms and squeezed her tightly. Very quietly she said, "I love you, Mammy." Again Agnes tapped her back and said, I know, love, I know. Now, off to school with you." Katty stuffed her sandwich and fruit into her bag and trotted merrily up the street. The whole incident had upset her terribly, and she was glad it was all over. But it wasn't. The morning passed quickly for Agnes. The early trade was brisk, and she moved a fair bit of stuff. Marion crossed her mind many times, but Agnes just worked on. At 12 o'clock she walked over to Smelly Nelly the fishmonger for a smoke and a chat. She didn't enjoy it. Try as she might, she had too much on her mind. When she finished her smoke, she went over to Fat Annie. "Annie, would you keep an eye on me gear for about a half an hour?"
"Ah, Jesus, Agnes. I was going to ask you to mind mine. Me ma's having Father Egan over for tea, and I promised her I'd drop her up the makings of a sandwich."
Agnes was perturbed, but only for a moment. I'll tell you what, give me your ma's stuff and I'll drop it up to her on the way back from the school. Please, Annie, I have to get up there." Fat Annie thought for a couple of seconds.
"All right."
She handed Agnes a bag.
"There's corned beef, ham, salad, onions and 2 cucumbers in there, tell her. If that's not good enough for Father Egan, he should get himself a parish on the south side."
The 2 women laughed. Agnes took the bag and headed for the Mother of Divine Providence School. There are certain smells you remember all of your life. The smell of a hospital, a confession box, a pub first thing in the morning. These are all recognisable smells. They cannot be confused with anything else. And you never forget the smell of school, Agnes thought. As she walked the corridor, the echo of her footsteps her only company. She glanced from side to side at each door. She stopped outside room 4. Agnes had no idea what she was going to say or do. She just knew she had to come here. Her handbag was in her left hand, and the bag Fat Annie had given her was in her right. So, to knock on the door, Agnes put both bags into her left hand. She rapped on the door. It was opened by a tall nun, taller than Agnes. For a moment Agnes could picture this big lump of a woman holding down her tiny 10-year-old daughter. "Yes, madam?" She sounded like a man. Agnes just stared at her. She could feel her heart beat louder. Over the nun's shoulder she could see the children looking at her. She couldn't see Cathy. Maybe this was the wrong class. "Can I help you, madam?" The nun's tone was now a little irritated. I'm looking for Sister Magdalene," Agnes said. "I am Sister Magdalene." "Well, I am Mrs. Browne, Cathy Browne's mother." "Yes." "Who gave you permission to cut her hair?" "Permission? Permission? Mrs. Browne, I do not need permission to keep discipline in my school. Is there anything else?" Agnes can't remember putting her hand in the bag. The thing seemed to just grow out of her palm. One second her hand was empty, the next thing she was wielding a bright green cucumber. She swung it in an arc, catching the nun square across the cheek with it. Unfortunately for Sister Magdalene, the cucumber wasn't quite ripe. Agnes remembers seeing something shoot out of the nun's mouth at the same time as the slap sounded. It was a pallet, on which there were 7 false teeth. The pallet clicked across the classroom floor like 7 little white tap dancers. Agnes turned on her heel and left the nun lying in the doorway. Halfway down the hallway, and without looking back, Agnes shouted, "Put that in your fucking pipe and smoke it." The police were waiting for Agnes at her stall when she returned. She had time only to ask Smelly Nelly to call in and check that the kids would be okay. The 2 Gardaí then arrested her and took her to Store Street Garda Station, where she was put into a holding cell to await her court appearance the next day. Looking back, Agnes was thankful for that 24 hours alone in the cell, with just her thoughts. For after mulling over Marion's illness for a long time and thinking about how she should react to it, she came to a decision. She would not refer to it at all. Agnes decided she would spend whatever time she had left with Marion just enjoying her, making her laugh, and above all, making the most of every second they had left together. That was one problem solved. Now for the court case. Agnes was escorted from the paddy wagon to the court's underground cells. They searched her, probably looking for dangerous fruit or vegetables. When she emerged from the basement cells to the dock, there was a cheer from the gallery. Agnes looked up. There was Fat Annie, Smelly Nelly, Winnie the Mackerel, Liam the Sweeper, Sweaty Betty, Doreen, Catherine, Sandra, Jacko, Splish and Splash, Buddha, her children, and Marion. She waved, and they waved and cheered. The justice banged his gavel. "Quiet up there, or I'll have you all thrown out. This is a court of law, not a circus." The room went quiet. The justice peered over his glasses, and, satisfied with the quiet, turned to Mrs. Browne. "Agnes Loretta Browne, you are charged with assault with a... I'm sorry." He now addressed the clerk. "This looks like cucumber." The clerk reddened and nodded. "Yes, Justice, it is indeed cucumber." The justice looked puzzled at first, then he smiled and continued. "With a cucumber, causing actual bodily harm, how do you plead?" "How do I what?" "How do you plead, woman?" "Well, I kind of squash me face up like this." Agnes squashed her face up and turned the sides of her mouth downwards. "And I say, no, go on, please." The justice stared at Agnes, then looked at the clerk, who simply shrugged his shoulders. He then looked back at Agnes. She was still in her pleading pose. "Stop that!" She did. He tried again. "Madam, are you trying to mock this court?" "No, Mr.
Justice.
Mr. Justice."
No, Mr. Justice.
"No, Mr. Justice." Again the justice stared. The clerk stood up and walked over to Agnes. "When you talk to him, call him Justice," he whispered. Agnes was relieved. "Oh, thank God, 'cause his full name is real long. I'd never remember it. Tell him he can call me Aggie." The clerk returned to his seat, on the way nodding to the justice that all was now explained.
Now, Mrs. Browne, can we begin again?
Yes, Justice.
Good girl. Now, did you or did you not assault Sister Magdalene with a cucumber, causing her actual bodily harm? Yes or no?
Yes. The justice nodded, but Agnes wasn't finished. And no.
What's that supposed to mean? Is it a yes or it's no?
Well, I did hit her, but all that happened was her false teeth fell out. Sure, there's no harm in that. The justice instructed the clerk to enter a plea of guilty to assault and not guilty to bodily harm. As this exchange was taking place, Agnes interrupted the justice. She cut me daughter's fringe off.
I beg your pardon?
I said she cut me daughter's fringe off. The nun, she cut it off.
Why? Why did the nun, sister, cut your daughter's fringe?
'Cause she went home to change her knickers.
What? Whose knickers? This is all very confusing.
The justice turned and addressed the arresting guard.
Is this Sister Magdalene in court?
The Garda stood.
No, Justice, but I have a sworn statement from her here. Well, that's all well and good, but I can't question a statement, and I want the whole story.
Agnes put her hand up as if she was in school, and the justice spotted her.
You wish to speak, Mrs. Browne?
Yes. Me daughter is here. She'll tell you the whole story.
Right. Bring her up.
Cathy was brought to the witness box by Marion. She sat on the chair, with her skinny little legs dangling like the frill of a curtain. To a silent courtroom, she told her story. Her tale was punctuated from time to time by oohs and ahs from the gallery. At one point in the story, even the justice let out a tut-tut. When she had finished, the courtroom was a picture to be seen. The justice with his hand over his eyes, the arresting guard, red-faced with embarrassment, turning left and right to those around him, saying, I knew none of this, I swear. And in the gallery, Smelly Nelly and Winnie the Mackerel were trying to raise a lynching party. Slowly, the justice took his hand from his eyes. He spoke to the arresting Garda.
Do you wish to question this witness, Garda?
Absolutely not, Justice.
Good.
He turned to Mrs. Browne.
Mrs. Browne, I'm dismissing all charges against you. However, I do not wish to see you here again. I can and do understand your anger, but you must act within the law. You should have reported this to the police.
Agnes laughed. Ha ha! And what policeman would arrest a nun on my word as quick as I was arrested on hers? There were over 20 Gardaí in the courtroom. All of them blushed. The justice was lost for a response. Instead, he again addressed the arresting Garda.
Garda,
done, Justice.
Garda done. I would like you to call on this Sister Magdalene and inform her of what was said and done here today.
I will, Justice.
I'm not finished. I also want you to tell her from me, and on behalf of the Gardaí, that any and all complaints received from parents concerning the ill treatment of children in her care will be fully investigated.
I'll do that, Justice.
Mrs. Browne.
Yes, Justice.
Take your family home.
Oh, thank you, Justice. There followed a huge cheer from the gallery, and a smattering of applause from the solicitors, barristers, and assorted criminals awaiting their business with the court. In the midst of all this, nobody saw Cathy stand tippy-toe at the justice's rostrum. The justice himself only saw her big brown eyes and tattered fringe. He leaned forward and asked,
Yes, Cathy?
Can I still make me confirmation?
Yes, Cathy, you can of course make your confirmation.
The eyes smiled. Thanks, mister. And off she ran to her mother. As it happened, Cathy's confirmation day was a great success. By the time the hairdresser was finished with her, Cathy was more than pleased with the outcome. On the day, she wore a pink two-piece suit decorated with tiny flowers around the edge of the lapel, a white high-collared blouse and white shoes. Archbishop McQuaid gave her the sacrament of confirmation, and to her relief, Cathy wasn't even asked a question. The 1.5-hour ceremony was followed by lunch in Bewley's Cafe, which, as always, was sumptuous. Then began the obligatory visiting of friends and relations. Transport for the day was provided by Ned Brady, a local baker. Ned had an Austin Cambridge and supplied the car, himself as driver, and petrol for £5.
By the end of the day, Cathy had visited 12 aunts and uncles, 7 of her mother's friends, including Marion and Tomo, and finally Foley's pub. Agnes and Cathy arrived home at 9 o'clock, exhausted. No sooner were they in the door than Cathy began emptying her pockets and handbag of the half-crowns, 10-shilling notes and the odd pound note. Agnes went to her bedroom and took off her good dress, and with a huge sigh of relief peeled off the roll-on that it seemed to be shrinking as the day wore on. When she returned to the kitchen, Cathy was sitting at the table with her confirmation money all sorted. "Well, how did you do?" £16 and 12 shillings, Cathy answered. "My God, you lucky thing. When I made my confirmation, I got 8 shillings, and I was delighted." The battle cry of all parents at confirmation time. Cathy just sat and surveyed her money. All this money, more than she had ever seen. Agnes sat down at the table opposite her. "So, have you decided what you're going to do with all your money, love?" "Yeah," Cathy answered, pleased with herself. "So, what's it to be?" "Well, I thought 2 shillings each for Dermo, Rory, Simon and Frankie. Half a crown for Marco. That's 10 and 6, right? Then 1 and 6 to buy Trevor a ball. That leaves £16, and I'm keeping £1 for myself." The child was glowing with the chance of being Santa Claus. "That still leaves you £15, love. Do you want me to save it for you?" Agnes asked. "No, Mammy. That's for you." "For me?" Agnes was taken aback. £15 was 3 weeks' profit from the stall. "Yeah, Mammy, for you. To buy anything you want." "Ah, you're very good, love, but I couldn't." "Mammy, please, take it. I want you to have it. Buy some Cliff Richard records with it." Agnes laughed. "With that kind of money I could buy all his records. No, I'll tell you what I'll do with it. I'll put a carpet on the floor. A nice bit of ex-minister. None of that tin-ton stuff. Real ex-minister with underfelt and all. Wouldn't that be nice?" "Lovely, Mammy. Can I go with you when you're buying it?" "Not only can you come, you can pick the carpet." Cathy was ecstatic. "Great," she screeched, and ran around the table for a hug. "Shh," Agnes whispered. "You'll wake the boys. Go on, off to bed with you, and hang that suit up. I might have to pawn it." Cathy had started to walk away, but turned around, shocked with the mention of the word pawn. "I'm only joking, love." Agnes laughed, and so did Cathy, as she floated into her bedroom. Agnes was struggling with the go-car down the steps, followed by Cathy holding Trevor. Today was the day that the new carpet was to be chosen. Agnes headed down James Larkin Street towards the city. About 1/3 of the way down the street, she noticed that there were builders working on a shop front across the road from Foley's pub. "What's going on there?" she asked Cathy. "It's a new chipper, Mammy." "A chipper? Sure, we already have McCarthy's. What do we want with another one?" "No, it's not that kind of one, Ma. It's going to sell pizzas." "What are they?" "I don't know, but Cathy Dowdle says they're lovely." "Are they fordin'?" "They must be." "Well, Browns won't be eating anything fordin', so they can keep it." They were now abreast of the new shop, and Agnes glanced in the window. What made her stop was the carpet. She had never seen carpet in a chipper for a start, and on top of this, the carpet on the floor was exactly what she had in mind for her flat. She backed up to look at it properly. A man came out of the shop. He was tanned and handsome and very attractive. He looked at Agnes standing there, her face pressed up against the shop window, and at the same time trying to shield the reflection with her hand. He was French. He'd just arrived in Ireland to set up his father's pizza parlor, and this was his first contact with an Irish woman. "We are not hoping, lady," he tried. Agnes turned and stared at him. He was really handsome. "I beg your pardon? I say the place is not open." "The place is not open, is that what you're trying to say?" Yes, this is it." "Do I look like I give a shite?" "Yes, that's right. We open tonight." "No, I said shite. It doesn't matter. Look, where did you get that carpet?" Sorry, you speak too fast." Too fast, right. Where did you," Agnes pointed, "ghetto that carpeto?" Agnes was now on one knee, slapping the ground. Another man joined the first one, and both looked at Agnes as if she were mad. Agnes tried again, this time to the second man. "Scuso mio, the carpeto. Which shoppo did you get it in, oh?" The second man wrinkled his forehead, turned his head toward the shop door and yelled, "Hey lads, come out and look at this one. She's a loony." "You speak English?" Agnes said. "I'm from Shelter Street, love. We nearly all do up there." Well, he doesn't. Agnes pointed at the foreigner. Ah, he's French, but he's all right. They got the carpet in McHugh's at Capel Street, love. Ah, thanks. It's nice, isn't it? Yeah, it is nice, yeah. I'll see you, thanks. Agnes took hold of the go-car and pushed on, but the Frenchman grabbed her arm and stopped her. Hello, my name is Pierre, he smiled. Lovely. I'm delighted for you. Agnes went to move on, but he wouldn't let go. She looked down at his hand. No wedding ring. He let go. What is your name, lady? My name is Agnes. Agnes Browne. You is very beautiful, Agnes Browne. Agnes blushed and pushed away from him. You mind your mouth, you Frenchman. Agnes scurried down the street towards town. Just before she turned the corner, she looked back. He was still standing there, one hand in his pocket and looking after her. He raised his other hand and waved. Agnes threw her head back indignantly and went around the corner. He's nice looking, Mammy, Cathy said. Agnes giggled and said, Yes, he is. Buying the carpet was a cinch. They knew exactly what they wanted when they walked in the door of McHugh's. It took all of 5 minutes. Cathy was a little disappointed, but she said nothing, as she could see that Mammy was beaming. The summer brought a new warmth to Moore Street, in every sense of the word. It was busier for a start, and the wandering shopkeepers now strolled up and down the market street with a smile on their face. The scent of strawberries and freshly picked raspberries hung in the air, and dealers' melodious cries, interspersed with laughter, made Agnes feel good to be alive. No sooner had this thought passed through her mind than she glanced over at Marion and felt strangely guilty. "Are you all right, Kaiser?" she yelled across. Marion looked up at the sound of her nickname, and when her eyes met with Agnes's, they smiled, the tiny grey dots turning into tiny grey slits. "How could you be all right with all this shite you have to put up with here?" Marion gestured with a wave of her arm to 4 shoppers that were picking through the fruit in her stall. Realising she was the target of the gesture, one woman shopper looked up and snorted. Marion snorted back at her. "Yeah, you're all right, Marion," thought Agnes. "Pick me out 3 nice cooking apples for apple tarts," one woman ordered Marion. "Pick you out? Do you want me to peel them as well? Should I have nothing else to do?" Marion replied. The woman was startled at first, but then seeing the cheeky grin on Marion's face, she burst into laughter, and Marion joined in. "Here you are, missus, 3 of me best, and that's 9pence. The woman handed over the 9pence and moved on, with a beaming smile on her face. Marion looked over at Agnes and gave a little wink. "I don't know how you get away with it," Agnes called. "Because I'm lovable and cuddly, and me apples is the best," answered Marion with a laugh. Agnes smiled to herself. Marion's spirits never seemed to flag, even though, little by little, as the days went by, Agnes saw her deteriorate. By mid-autumn, she was getting tired more easily. She became the victim of huge mood swings, the brunt of which were borne by an increasingly depressed Tomo. It was, Agnes reflected, as if Marion knew she had just had her last summer. Once again, Agnes tried to get Marion to give the stall a break for a while and spend the time at home. "I'd die at home all day, every day," Marion would say, with a wry grin. Agnes wondered if she knew. She suspected that she did, for Marion began to do funny things that were out of character. For instance, she now held Tomo's hand, in the pub, out shopping, all of the time. And one chilly morning when Marion came over with the Bovril for the morning break, they had a most unusual conversation. When the fags were lit and the time was right for the ritual chat, but instead of the usual chatter, Marion opened with a question. "Have you any dreams, Agnes?" "Oh, Jesus, I have. I'd love to win the sweepstake and get the fuck out of here." The two laughed, then came a pause. "No, I mean real dreams," Marion probed again. "Like at night in bed?" "No, how do I mean it? You know, sometimes you feel that life is passing you by. You're doing nothing. Oh, you're busy all right, but you're not doing anything. Do you ever feel that?" "I haven't a clue what you're fucking talking about." You know." "I don't know, Marion, I don't. Busy doing nothing. What the fuck is that supposed to mean?" "Cliff Richard." "What about him?" You told me once that you'd love to dance with Cliff Richard, am I right?" "Yeah." "Well, that's what I mean. That's a dream. That's something that could happen."
Oh, sure, Marion. Cliff will stroll down Moore Street to my stall and say, "How ya, Agnes? Give us 5 red apples and come here. Will you dance with us?" It could happen. I'm not sure about the apples, though. The two women laughed, and Agnes was relieved that Marion wasn't going off her rocker. But Marion wasn't finished yet. "Do you know what I'd like to do before I die?" Marion said this without looking at Agnes, and likewise Agnes looked away, scratched her neck, and tried to sound as casual as she possibly could. "What?" "I'd love to learn to drive," Marion answered, excited. "What? Drive? Drive what?" "A car, of course." "But you haven't got a car." "So? People learn Spanish." "What's that got to do with driving a car?" "People learn Spanish and they don't go to Spain. So why shouldn't I learn to drive?" Agnes had no answer for this perverted logic. She just sat open-mouthed. Marion took this as a request for more information and went on. "There's a driving school in Talbot Street. I called in, and it cost £9 for 15 lessons. That's a saving of over £2, because it's 15 shillings a lesson. It's a special pre-Christmas offer. What do you think?" Agnes still didn't change her expression. She was digesting all of this slowly. She spoke slowly too. "You're going to pay out £9 to learn to drive something that you haven't got?" "It's me dream." "Fuck the dream. Get a cheaper dream. You're out of your mind, Marion. Really, it's ridiculous." Neither of the two women spoke for a while. Well, not to each other anyway. Agnes would take a sup of Bovril and say, "Drive me arse," to herself. Other than that, all was silent. Marion stood and took the 2 mugs, brushed down her apron and screwed the stopper back on the flask. She was just about to leave, but instead she put her hand on Agnes's arm and said, "If you could dance with Cliff Richard for £9, you'd fucking jump at it." And she walked back to her stall. And it wasn't over. That night after the bingo, Marion brought up the subject again. The two were on their second round of points. The post-mortem and the bingo was finished, and as usual both were taking in what was happening at the tables around them. "There's Dermot Flynn," Marion pointed out. "Dermot Flynn? Where?" "Over there, look, at the domino table." "Oh, I see him. He's looking well." "Is he happy with his move out of town?" "I don't know. I haven't seen him since they moved. You can be sure she's happy. She has notions, that one." "Yeah, town wasn't good enough for her." Marion confirmed that Dermot Flynn's wife was a snob. "Mind you," Marion continued, "when you can drive, you can move where you like." She took a sip of her drink. Agnes saw the bait splashing in the water. She was tempted to change the subject and annoy Marion, but she'd already given it some thought. Marion was right. Agnes would pay £9 to dance with Cliff Richard. She'd pay £90 if she had it. So if Marion could fulfil her dream, stupid as it was, then why shouldn't she? So she rose to the bait. "I was thinking about that, Marion." "About what, Agnes?" "You learning to drive. What you said today." "Oh, yes, really, I forgot about that. What about it?" "You're right." "Am I?" "I know. Do you think so, Agnes?" Marion was excited now. "Yeah. Yeah. Do it." "Oh, I'm delighted you agree with it, Agnes. The man in the school said he could take us out Tuesday night for the first one." "Lovely." "Wait a minute. What do you mean, us?" "Us? You and me? I'm not getting into a car with a stranger on my own." "Well, I'm not getting in with you." "Who'll be driving?" "I will." "You can fuck off, Marion Monks, if you think I'm going to be your first victim." "Ah, you'll be all right, Agnes. The car has controls on his side as well. It's bisexual. He can take over at any time he likes. You just have to sit in the back, just for mortal support, that's all." "No." "Ah, Agnes, for your pal." "No, no, no." "I'll get you a cider. PJ, when you're ready." "You can buy all the cider in China, Marion. The answer is no. N-O, no." Marion's tiny grey eyes sparkled with excitement as they gazed from the small, elongated rear-view mirror. "Are you all right in the back, Agnes?" "Never mind me. You watch the fucking road." Agnes was terrified. She couldn't believe she'd let Marion talk her into this. "Agnes, relax, for God's sake." Marion turned around in the driver's seat. "I'd hate to see you if the car was going." "Don't touch anything, do you hear me? Wait till your man comes out. Don't touch anything." "Oh, shite, we're moving." "We're not." "Agnes, will you stop?" "If I'd known you were going to be like this, I wouldn't have let you come." Let me come. Let me fucking come. You dragged me here, you bloody bitch. Marion saw the driving instructor close the door of the office building and make his way to the car. Say nothing, Agnes. Here's the constructor. Marion sat properly in the car, facing forwards. The instructor walked around the vehicle, clipboard in hand, as if examining the vehicle. In fact, that's exactly what he was doing. The women's heads followed him around the car. What's he doing? Asked Marion. I don't know. Is he looking for the way in? Don't be silly, it's his car. He's probably doing a safety check. He knows we're from the Jarrow, Marion. He's counting the fucking wheels. Both women howled with laughter. The instructor stopped and looked at the laughing women. They both stopped abruptly. Marion spoke, trying not to move her lips. Oh, fuck. He didn't like that. Agnes looked closer at the man now. He was completely bald, with a flat nose. She whispered to Marion, Jesus, look at the puss on him. Someone hit him with a fucking frying pan. Agnes, fuck off. I'll start laughing again. The instructor tapped on Marion's window. Marion looked at him, po-faced. What? She yelled. The instructor made a fist of his hand and moved it in a circular motion. He wants a wank, said Agnes. Marion burst out laughing again. Agnes covered her face with her hands. Well, he can fuck off, and the two held harder. The instructor put a hand to his mouth. Roll down the window, please, he yelled. What did he say? Marion asked. He wants to know if you're a widow, Agnes replied. Marion shook her head in exaggerated movements and yelled, No! The instructor now looked puzzled. Wind the knob, he pointed downwards. What did he say? I'm not sure. Something about his knob. He does want a wank. You prevert. Hang on, I'll open the window. We'll hear them better. Marion opened the window and Agnes leaned forward to catch what was being said. Marion smiled. I couldn't hear you with the window up, she explained. Well, that's what I was... Oh, never mind. I just want to check the brake lights. Press on the brake pedal. Marion looked down at the pedals. She lifted her foot and pressed it down on one of the pedals. The instructor shook his head. No, Mrs. Monks, that's the accelerator. We mustn't get these two mixed up. The brake pedal stops the car, and the one you're pushing makes it go faster. Agnes jumped up and tried to crawl between the two seats. I'm getting out, fuck this. Marion pushed her back. Will you relax, Agnes? I'm only learning. Now, she declared, as she pushed her foot down on the brake pedal. That's it, said the instructor, and he walked to the back of the car to check that both lights were working. Marion watched him in the mirror. Agnes turned to see him bathed in red light, and Marion spoke to the back of Agnes's head. Will you relax? What'll he think of us? The instructor made a note on his clipboard and put his pen away. Shut up. Who cares what he thinks? He looks like a big penis. The women giggled. Shh, he's coming, said Marion. Ask him his name. I bet it's Mickey. I betcha. The passenger door opened, and the instructor sat into the seat. He slammed the door shut. Right, Mrs. Monks, let's begin. Oh, please call me Marion. Oh, okay, Marion. And what's your name? Marion asked. Both women waited expectantly. Oh, I'm sorry. He put his hand out. My name is Tom. Oh, said Marion, disappointed. Yes, Tom O'Toole, he finished. The women burst into hysterical laughter. Tears flowed from Agnes's eyes, and her cheeks were streaked with mascara. Marion gripped her stomach with both hands and bent forwards till her forehead touched the steering wheel. Agnes fell back and rolled from side to side in the back seat. The instructor was startled at first, but as the laughter continued, he became very irate. Ladies, please! It took a little time, but the two women eventually stopped, for the moment. The women were now infected with the dreaded giggles. For the present, though, they were quiet. The instructor began. Now, turn the key and push the accelerator gently. Marion did this, and the engine gunned into life. That's good. Now, depress the clutch. What? Depress the clutch. How do I do that? Asked Marion. But before the instructor could answer, Agnes was in with, Show us your electricity bill. The women were off again, howling and slapping seats. Suddenly, Marion stopped and slumped forward. Agnes carried on laughing a little longer, but then noticed that Marion wasn't moving. She prodded Marion's back, and still with a laugh in her voice said, Hey, Kaiser. Marion didn't move. Agnes jumped up and out of the car. She ran to the driver's door and pulled it open. Marion had started to come round. What's wrong? Marion mumbled. Are you okay? Oh, Marion, love, are you okay? I think so, but I feel tired.
Has she been drinking? The instructor asked accusingly.
Agnes ignored him. She helped Marion gently out of the car and stood her against the passenger door. Marion looked deathly white. Even her lips had paled. She was shaking. Agnes wanted to do something, anything to help Marion, but she could think of nothing to either do or say, so she took Marion in her arms and hugged her tightly. The instructor was now out of the car.
If the lesson is cancelled, I still have to be paid.
How would you like me to cancel the rest of your fucking life? Agnes spat at him. He retreated to the office. Marion and Agnes stood embracing by the car. The evening traffic rumbled past them on Talbot Street. Without being aware of it, as she held Marion, Agnes had mascara running down her face and was patting Marion's back and hoarsely whispering, "There, there, there." Agnes's words were coming in sobs. Marion's death had come swiftly. Everyone had been prepared for a drawn-out, painful death from the cancer that was eating away at her. But, true to form, Marion's heart attack got them all by surprise. It was now 3 days since Marion's funeral. Agnes' shoulders heaved with shudders of grief as she sat in the snug of Foley's lounge. "I was planning on getting her to Lourdes," she said to Monica Foley, wife of the publican and the only other person on the premises, for it was 1 a.m, and the drinkers had long since gone. Monica simply nodded her head and replied, "I know, 'tis terrible. I was hoping for a miracle, yeah, a miracle, you know what I mean, Monica." "I do, Agnes. Well, maybe you got your miracle." Monica tried by way of consolation. "Marion went quickly and peacefully, and when it comes down to it, wouldn't we all want that?" She was genuinely sad for Agnes, but it was late, and she really wanted Agnes out of the pub and home. "I never thought of that." "Yeah, I know what you mean, Monica. A miracle, yeah, could be." Agnes took a slug out of her cider. Monica glanced at the glass. Only a slug left, thank God. Agnes moved closer to Monica. Her voice now took on a conspiratorial tone. "Monica, if I tell you something, now it's weird, but promise me you won't tell a soul, will you?" "Is it a long story, Agnes? 'Cause it's very late." "This won't take long, Monica, but it's, well, you know, it's, just promise me." "I promise, I do, I promise." "Good. Well, I'll tell you." Agnes picked up the glass to take the last drop, then changed her mind, put the glass down, and to Monica's disappointment, took out her cigarettes and matches. 30 seconds later, Agnes was puffing and ready to begin her tale. "Right, Monica. 15 years ago." 15 years? Agnes, is this going to be a long story?" Shh, it's not. And anyway, it's worth it, I swear." "Well, go on then, I'm listening." "Okay, so where was I? Oh, yeah. For the last 15 years, I've been meeting Marion Monks every morning. We push our prams down through the Jarrow. Sometimes we'd chat, sometimes we'd have nothing to say, and so we'd say nothing. Exactly. Anyway, one thing never changed. When we got to St. Giles Church, Marion would run up the steps, pull open the door." Agnes paused, the memory filling her eyes and her throat closing tightly. "And she'd yell." Again a pause, this time quickly filled by Monica. "Hello, God, 'tis me, Marion." "Yeah, that's it. How'd you know?" "Yet everybody in the Jarrow knew about that, Agnes." "Is that the story? 'Cause if it is, I heard it before." Monica stood up to give Agnes the hint. Agnes patted the seat where Monica had been sitting. Sit down, sit down. You haven't heard this bit. Sit down." Monica sat with a sigh. "Agnes, really, it is late. Please, hurry up, will you?" "I will." "Anyway, I watched her doing this day after day, year after year. I thought it was stupid, and I told her that, but still, every morning, she'd be up them steps. 'Hello, God, it's me, Marion.'" There was a pause. Agnes at last drank the end of her drink and squashed a cigarette into the ashtray. "I could hear those words in me head as I walked up them steps 3 days ago, behind Marion's coffin. 'How could you do this, God?' I thought. This woman never forgot you. What did she get for it? Then as we walked through the doors of the church and we started down the aisle, I got me answer. The organ struck a very low note, and in the middle of the drone I heard, as clear as day, a warm, strong voice saying, "Hello, Marion. It's me, God." And I just knew she was going to be all right. Agnes lifted her head to Monica, who was sitting open-mouthed, not with shock, but asleep. Agnes chortled. She leaned over and touched Monica gently on the arm. "Monica, love." Monica jumped. "What? Oh, Agnes, what was that? I missed the end of it. What was it?" Nothing, Monica. It was just me shy talking. Listen, let me out, love, will you? And go on to your bed." Agnes gathered her cigarettes in her handbag and put her coat on. Monica walked her to the side door, opened it, peered out first to make sure there were no police about, and quietly said good night to Agnes. When she stepped out into the night air, Agnes took a deep breath. The door closed gently behind her, but when the bolt was pushed into place, it banged like a gunshot. "Holy Jesus, Monica!" Agnes yelped, the words coming in bursts of steam from her mouth in the cold night air. Behind the door she heard Monica say, "Shh! Shush me arse, you frightened the fucking life out of me." Agnes gathered herself together and started for home. It wasn't as easy a journey as it usually was. The path had become somewhat uneven, causing Agnes to walk a zigzag route. Another thing, the steps she was taking were a little unsteady, and the curbs, well, they were ridiculously high. Still, Agnes soldiered on. After about 100 yards or so, she began to feel ill. "Must be something I ate," she thought, even though she'd not eaten a meal for days, just a couple of sandwiches here and there. She stopped and leaned against the building. Her stomach heaved, and she knew it was coming. She prepared for it, taking out the pallet that held her 2 front teeth. She bent over and threw up with enthusiasm. "Are you all right, beautiful Agnes Browne?" a voice from behind her asked, as a gentle hand was placed on her shoulder. The accent was clearly French. Agnes knew it was the Pierre fella from the pizza place. "Where's me fucking teeth?" she thought. They'd been in her hand just seconds ago. She opened her hand and looked, but all it now contained was a tissue she'd taken from her coat pocket. She must have put them in her pocket while she was taking out the tissue. She didn't turn, she didn't move. "Mademoiselle Agnes, with your sparkle eyes, are you okay?" Agnes was afraid to answer, for with the 2 teeth missing, yes would have sounded like a sow breaking wind. So she grunted, "Yeah," and nodded her head slowly. She put her hand into her pocket and felt the teeth. She tried to drop the tissue and pick up the teeth in one gentle movement. She couldn't. The teeth were now caught in the tissue. "Turn around and let me gaze at you." He started to pull at her shoulder. Oh no, Agnes thought. Without me 2 front teeth I looked like a fucking vampire. He had started to turn her. She swiftly pulled the teeth from her pocket and pretended to cough while ramming the pallet into her mouth. He turned her fully around. She tried to speak. She couldn't. The tissue was sticking out of her mouth. She said, "I'm grand, thank you," but it came out as "arf, arf, arf, arf," and she turned and went to walk away. He ran in front of her. "I am very new to Dublin. Would you show me around sometime?" he asked. "I'm sorry, no, love," she replied, but all he heard was "arf, arf, arf, arf." "Oh, marvellous. What about the next weekend? Maybe Friday?" "Arf, arf, arf, arf." "Oh, good. We meet in Foley's at 8 o'clock. Arf, 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 arf." Agnes was red with frustration. "Au revoir, then," and off he walked. Agnes was trying to roar after him that it was not a date. She stood shouting after him. "Ruff, ruff, 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 ruff." 2 men walked past her, and one shouted, "Sit, Fido, sit," and they both laughed. Whether she liked it or not, Agnes Browne had a date for Friday night. Although winter was here, the Saturday morning sun was still a little warm and welcoming as Mark pushed his cart out of the flat and headed through the Jarrow. He had sent Dermot to Granny's with Trevor and herded all the other children out of the flat so his mother could have a sleep in. She needed it. She had come home drunk last night. He woke when he heard the front door open. She pottered around the flat, muttering to herself. Mark got up to see that she was all right. He expected to find her in the kitchen, but she wasn't there, though the kettle was on the lighted stove. The bathroom door was half open, so he peeped in. His mother was bent over the sink with her false teeth in her hand. She was picking pieces of tissue off them and muttering things like, "Cheeky French bastard," the last word sending a spray of spittle onto the mirror.
he quietly slipped back into bed. Mark was very proud of his cart. He'd made it himself. The main body was a strong wooden box that he'd picked up on the docks. 3 lengths of 2x2 made up the handles and axle. It took about 5 hours of walking up and down the railway lines to find 2 matching bearings for the wheels, but it was worth it. It was acknowledged by one and all that Mark Browne's cart was the finest in the Jarrow. Each Saturday morning Mark would push the cart down to the turf depot in Sean McDermott Street. Since Redzer's death, Agnes Browne was allowed 2 bags of turf per week as part of her widows and orphans pension. This was a nice bonus, as the turf burnt well, and the 2 bags, along with a bag of coal and a half bag of slack, would last the whole week. The catch was, you had to collect the turf from the depot yourself, supplying your own sacks and cart. Mark was first in the queue every Saturday morning, arriving there a half an hour before the depot opened. He would bring a football with him and play up against the depot wall until the turf man arrived about 8:30. Mark did most of his thinking while tapping that ball against the wall. This morning his thoughts were about his future. It was nearing the end of October now, over 8 weeks since his friends had gone back to school. Mark had decided not to return, but to go to work. But he had spent the 8 weeks just looking and not finding a job. The problem was his mother's insistence on him taking up a trade. "I don't want you going from job to job and back to the dough like your father," she preached. "You get a trade like your Uncle Gonzo." Uncle Gonzo's name was actually Bismarck. The name had been picked by his father to rile the baptizing priest, whom Uncle Gonzo's father believed to have been a British spy in 1916. The gesture was met with hurrahs in the local pub, but Uncle Gonzo had to carry the can for his father's heroism. Fortunately for him, he was born with a bright red nose, which grew larger and redder as he fed it with Irish whiskey. Bismarck soon became Gonzo, after the popular vaudeville clown with the big red nose, although his was plastic. Uncle Gonzo was a plumber. He was a very good plumber. He was so successful that he became the first of the Browne family to buy his own home. Agnes Browne was very proud of Uncle Gonzo, and it was clear to her that the road to success began with a signpost that said, "Get a trade." Mark didn't want to be a plumber. He continued to tap the ball up against the wall and considered his future. He was so engrossed that he didn't see the elderly man coming across the road from one of the 4 large townhouses that faced the turf depot. The man watched Mark for a few moments and then spoke to him. "Little boy." Mark, startled, took his eye off the ball. It came off the wall and past him. Mark ran after the ball and retrieved it. Slowly and reluctantly, he walked back to the man. He looked at the man suspiciously. It didn't help that the man had a peculiar accent that made him sound like the villain in a Boris Karloff movie. The man gestured to the boy to come towards him. "Come here, quickly." "What do you want, mister?" "Come closer, boy. You want that I should shout instead of talk?" Mark walked towards him and gaped at this strange-speaking man. He was, Mark guessed, about 100 years old. His hair was grey and bushy, with a bald track down the centre. His back was slightly bent. His face was tanned, but looked as if it could be a kind face. He had grey eyes behind little circular glasses, which were perched on a huge nose shaped like a crow's beak. He wore a striped shirt, but without its collar attached, over which he wore no less than 3 cardigans. To Mark's young eyes, this was a strange creature indeed. When the man spoke, his voice was gentle. "Every Saturday I see you here, always the same time, 8 o'clock, the man stated. "Yeah, so what?" "Never a Saturday do you miss. Rain or shine, you are here always the same." "Yeah, you already said that, so what?" "This tells me maybe you are a reliable boy. Are you, eh? Are you a reliable boy?" "No, I'm a Browne." The little man chuckled, and as he did, he tapped his tie lightly. "How would you like to earn 2 shillings, young Browne?" "2 bob?" "Yes, 2 bob." "For what? What do I have to do?" "What you have to do is come into my house and light my fire for me." "Light your fire?" "Yes. 2 bob to light your fire. That's it." The man nodded and clasped his hands together as he said this. "Why? Why? Why what? Why would you give me 2 bob to light your fire?" The little man walked to Mark's cart and sat on the edge of it. He had not anticipated being questioned. He assumed that 2 shillings would be taken, no questions asked. With a crooked finger he pushed his glasses up his nose. "I am Jewish, and today is my Sabbath." "You're a Jew, man? From the pawn shop?" Again the man chuckled. I do not own a pawn shop, although I believe the man that does is indeed Jewish. And that's how you say it, Jewish, not a Jew man. What's a Sabbath? It's a holy day. Saturday is to me what Sunday is to you. The man gesticulated with his hands while he spoke. They moved gracefully. They reminded Mark of a magician's hands. What has all this got to do with lighting your fire? Well, in my religion we can't do certain things on a Saturday. Lighting a fire is one of them. Then how are you supposed to keep warm? My faith in God keeps me warm. Yeah, but it won't light your fire, mister. This time the man laughed. It was a bright laugh, and as Mark would describe later, all of him laughed. His eyes, his chin, his eyebrows, and he opened his arms wide as he laughed. Perhaps you are right, young Brown, but tell me, will 2 shillings light my fire? Flippin' right it will. Mark smiled at the man for the first time. He dropped the ball into the cart, and the two walked to the house. As they strolled across the road, the elderly man put his hand on Mark's shoulder. So, let's introduce ourselves properly. You can call me Mr. Vyse. Why, what's wrong with your real name? Mark asked. That is my real name. Henry Vyse. And what goes along with Brown? Mark. My word, look at this. I get a profit. 2 shillings for lighting your fire. So do I. The last date Agnes Browne had been on was when Redzer had taken her to the dog racing in Shelbourne Park. It had cost her a fortune. As soon as Redzer lost all his money, and that only took 4 races, he began to borrow hers. By the night's end, they were both penniless and had to walk home. That was the night Redzer proposed. Well, proposed is a bit strong. What had happened was, they were walking along the canal towards Pearse Street, but not into Pearse Street. Redzer couldn't go near Pearse Street. He was a marked man following an incident involving some Teds and a cutthroat razor. So that night they had turned off the canal and walked down by the Mead Hospital. As they strolled past the back of the biscuit factory, Agnes felt the moment was right. Redzer. What? Do you love me? Don't be stupid. Of course I do. Agnes took a deep breath. Well, I'm pregnant. She waited for a reaction. He didn't look at her. He didn't stop walking. He simply said, Are you? Yeah. There was silence for the next 50 yards. Then he said, We better get married, so. Agnes was thrilled. She stopped, glowing inside. Will we? Really, Redzer, will we? Yeah, I said so, didn't I? Agnes threw her arms around him. Oh, Redzer. Hey, fuck off, will you? Give it over. Redzer was embarrassed by any overt affection unless there was a lot of drink taken. I'll get you a ring at the weekend. Redzer knew a man who had access to these things. I don't want a ring, Agnes said. Oh, why not? It's a waste of money. You can't do anything with a ring. I want a bike. A fucking bike? Yeah, a bike, but a good one. An engagement bike. Agnes knew what she was doing. Firstly, with a bike, she could have a bit of independence, and secondly, she knew that any engagement ring from Redzer would eventually end up in the pawn. She lost on both counts. For when they were only 2 weeks married, Redzer sold the bike anyway to get money for the bookies. But the point is, Redzer never asked her out again. He took her out. But every girl knows that there's a huge difference between being asked out and being took out. So with Friday looming, Agnes felt like a teenager once again going on a first date. 1 minute she was going and the next she wasn't. She told the children about her date with the Frenchman. There was some resistance. You can't, Ma. Mammies don't go on dates, Mark protested. He was not happy at all. Well, this Mammy is. I think it's great, Ma, Cathy chirped. Thanks, love. Frenchmen lick your teeth when they're kissing, Cathy Dowdle says, Cathy added. Stop that talk. That Cathy Dowdle one has too much to say for herself, Agnes snapped. Agnes began getting ready at 6 o'clock on the Friday. She was hoping for a relaxing bath, but it wasn't to be. No sooner had she filled the bath and got it foaming thanks to the Quicks washing up liquid she added, and immersed herself, than Trevor came into the bathroom and began to strip. Within minutes, Cathy too was in the bath. No rest for the wicked, Agnes said aloud as she washed Cathy's hair. By 7:30 she was dressed and putting the finishing touches to her makeup. In the sitting room, the children were waiting for Agnes to make her grand entrance from the bedroom. There was an air of excitement about, although Mark showed no signs of interest whatsoever. When Agnes emerged, she sailed into the centre of the room and did a twirl, saying, "Well, what do you think?" The children were dumbstruck. Kathy said, "Wow," and began to clap, and the others joined in. Mark couldn't believe his eyes. Was this beautiful woman really his mother? Agnes looked stunning. He stood up and he walked towards her, his eyes wide. Agnes stood straight and awaited his rebuke. "And you, Mark, what do you think?" The boy smiled. "I think Dublin has a very lucky Frenchman tonight. You're beautiful, Ma. Really, just beautiful." "Thanks, love." Agnes hugged him in relief. The other children jumped up and they all hugged each other, cheering loudly. "Mind me frock, for Christ's sake," Agnes yelled. They went to the door to see her off. She walked to the top of the stairs and turned back to them. 6 glowing faces, with smiles as wide as the doorway. She was as proud of them as they of her. Agnes turned a few heads when she made her way through the lounge and Foley's to the snug. PJ brought her over a glass of cider. "I take it you're not going to the bingo tonight then, Agnes?" "No, PJ, not tonight." Agnes gave little away. PJ didn't inquire any further. Agnes hoped that the French fellow would slip in quietly and they could leave with as little fuss as possible. She could see the entrance from where she sat. She decided that as soon as he walked in, she would wave at him. Bang on the rendezvous time, the door opened, and in walked Pierre. His dark hair was slicked back with brill cream. He wore a tan polo neck under a dark brown jacket and cream pants. He stuck out like a sore thumb. He was carrying a huge bunch of flowers. He glanced around the lounge. "Sweet mother of Jesus," Agnes said aloud when she saw him. "He thinks he's fucking Elvis." If only Marion was here now for moral support. She slid down on her seat, hoping he wouldn't see her, and that he might leave, thinking that she hadn't shown up. He didn't see her. His face changed to a disappointed expression, and he turned to leave. From behind the bar, PJ called to him. "Hey, Sham, she's in the snug." Snook? Pierre held his hand to his ear. No, the snug, back there." PJ gestured with his thumb. Pierre made his way to the snug. He stood at the doorway, transfixed. "Sacre bleu, Agnes Browne, you are a vision of heaven," he said aloud. There was a cheer and a round of applause from the lounge. "What did he say?" asked the deaf old man. "She's a vision of heaven," his wife roared in his ear. Pierre wasn't finished. "I would cross the Alps barefooted. I would suffer torture, any pain, to be with such a beauty as you." He proffered the flowers. What did he say?" Again the shout from the deaf old man. "He's fucking mad into her," his wife shouted back. This was received by another cheer and applause. In a panic reaction, Agnes jumped up and walked towards him. "Come on, you fucking idiot, let's go." They left to applause and cheers, Pierre giving salutes to all and sundry, Agnes as red as a beetroot. It turned out to be the most magnificent evening Agnes had ever known. They went to a posh French restaurant with tablecloths and candles on the tables. When they got out of the taxi, Pierre held the door open for her. Each time she came back from the toilet, Pierre stood and held her chair. Agnes didn't eat much, half because of her excitement and half because she didn't like eating anything she couldn't pronounce. There was soft music and Pierre bought a bottle of champagne. Agnes wasn't sure she'd like it, and was pleasantly surprised when she found it tasted quite like cider. There was a tiny dance floor in the restaurant, and Pierre took Agnes up, and they danced cheek to cheek. Agnes was thrilled, but wished that Pierre was Cliff Richard. Well, you can't have everything. They left the restaurant, got a taxi to St. Charles Church, and began to walk home from there. Pierre slipped his hand into hers. He looked up at the clear winter sky and said, "I love the stars." "Me too. Spencer Tracy, Olivia de Havilland." No, I mean the real stars." "What do you mean, real stars? Spencer Tracy, he's brilliant." No, these stars in the sky," he pointed. Oh, you idiot. Them." Before long they had reached James Larkin Court. The two stood at the bottom of the steps. Agnes let go of Pierre's hand. "Well, Pierre, that was the best night I've ever had." "Me too. It was fantastic." "Thanks." No, thank you." No, thank you." Then they were both silent.
He smiled at her and put his hands in his pockets. "Well, then." "Yeah, well, then. Listen, good night." Agnes turned to climb the steps. Pierre called after her. "Agnes." When she turned back to him, he had his arms stretched out. "What? No kiss good night to finish such a beautiful evening?" Slowly Agnes descended the steps. Her legs felt unsteady. Her heart was thumping. When she stood face to face with Pierre, he wrapped his arms around her and gently touched his lips upon hers. Her lips relaxed. His mouth felt warm and strong. Her eyelids fluttered and slowly closed. She was just about to melt into his arms when suddenly she felt something dart into her mouth. It was Pierre's tongue. Her eyes opened quickly. "He's licking me fucking teeth," she thought. She let out a yelp and pushed him away. "Ah, you dirty bastard! What is it? What did I do?" He was shocked. Agnes's slap caught him by surprise and stung his cheek. You prevert." Agnes took the steps 2 by 2 and slammed the door, leaving behind one very sore and confused Frenchman. It had snowed overnight, and the cart was difficult to push. It was empty now. What would it be like coming back from the depot full of turf? Mark decided he would cross that bridge when he came to it. He parked the cart and shuffled across the icy road to Mr. Wise's house. He didn't have to knock. He never did now. Mr. Wise would open the door just as Mark got to it. "Good morning, Mark," Mr. Wise greeted him. Mark noticed that today Mr. Wise was wearing at least 5 cardigans. Where does he get them, he thought. "Good morning, Mr. Wise. Cold day?" "Yes, it is. Get it going quickly and I will make us both the hot chocolate." Mark's eyes brightened. "Yeah, lovely." When the fire was blazing and the chill gone off the room, Mark sat in a chair by the window so as to keep an eye on his cart. Mr. Wise arrived into the room with 2 mugs of hot chocolate and the usual single biscuit. Mark reckoned it would be next Easter before he'd used up an entire packet. He took the mug gratefully, cupping his hands around it, and took a sip. It was piping hot. "Have you any kids, Mr. Wise?" Mark asked. "Just one. My boy, Manny. Well, he's not a boy, really. He must be 40 now. He lives in England. He comes home maybe once, maybe twice a year. He's a busy boy." "Is he coming home for Christmas, Mr. Wise?" "Oh, no." "Is that why you've no decorations or a Christmas tree?" "Oh, no. That's because I am Jewish." "What's that got to do with it?" Well, you see, Mark, we don't believe in Christmas." Mark laughed heartily and was sure the old man was kidding. "Will you go on there with that? How can you not believe in something when it's real?" Mr. Wise smiled, amused at the simple innocence of the boy. "It's a long story, too long for me to tell, so let's not go into it, Mark, huh?" "Oh, okay, Mr. Wise. What about you, Mark? Are you ready for Christmas?" "Nearly. I got soldiers for Trevor, a doll for Cathy. I'm getting a parachuter for Rory. I'll get colouring books, I think, for Simon and Dermot. They're twins, and you have to get them the same. And I'm giving Frankie a selection box. I don't know what to get me Mammy, though." "Why not some perfume?" "Well, no, I got her aftershave last year and she never used it. Now, I want to get her something different. I have to think. Yes, well, I'm sure you'll think of something. How is your mother?" "Grand. She's giving me a hard time about not getting a job, but she's grand. It looks like I'll be going back to school." "You sound disappointed. School will be good for you." "Not for me. Mr. Wise, I'm no good at it. I'm brutal. Some of the lads in the class are good at it, but I'm not. I'm poxy. Now, I want to work." "What about training as a carpenter?" "What about it?" "Would you like to do that? Make shelves and furniture?" "Oh, yeah, I would. But is it a trade?" "Oh, yes. One of the finest of the trades. I built me cart myself, you know." Mark pointed out the window. "And a good cart it is, too," Mr. Wise complimented him. "It's the best in the Jarrow." Mr. Wise looked at the boy. His own boy, Manny, was a schmuck. Spoiled by his mother, Manny never came home, not since his mother had passed away. He wondered if Mark had been given the education and attention that Manny had got. What could hold this boy back? "Mark, I will give you a job." Mark spun from the window. "Will you, Mr. Wise? Will you?" "Yes, Mark, I will." "Doing what?" Apprentice carpenter in my factory." Mark jumped from the chair and hugged the old man, a man that had not been genuinely hugged for 40 years.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Thank you. Hold it. This will be a real job, and there is a catch. Mark's face dropped. What's the catch? He asked. If you train with me, you must also go to school. For 2 half-days a week. Oh, no. Wait, it's carpentry school, not like the school you have in mind. In this school they teach you to be a carpenter. What do you say, eh? The boy smiled again. I say I'm your bleeding man, Mr. Wise. OK, you start Monday. Be here 8 o'clock sharp. Your wages will be £1 and 15 shillings a week. Mark floated across the road to the turf depot. What should have been a difficult journey home was made easy by the excitement of getting a job. The snow melted beneath his feet, and the cart felt like it was full of cotton wool. He couldn't wait to tell his mammy. It was by accident on that Saturday morning that Agnes found out about the concert. She'd done her usual rummage around the Hill Market, then headed down Henry Street to do a bit of shopping for the Christmas. She bought 7 sets of underwear and socks. She bought the guns and holsters for Simon, Dermot and Frankie. In his letter to Santi, Rory had asked for an embroidery set, but she hadn't decided on that yet. The shopping had taken it out of her a bit, so she decided to treat herself to a coffee and a cake in Arnott's. As she sat at her table nursing her coffee, surrounded by bags, Agnes couldn't help overhearing the 2 women at the table beside her. They were Southsiders and talked posh. I don't know why we shop on this side, Deirdre. It's so difficult to get shops over here to deliver. Oh, come on now, Philomena, it's fun. All the dealers calling out and the hustle and bustle. Come on. I suppose. There was a lull in the conversation, and Agnes stopped listening and returned to her own thoughts. Bud had promised he'd get her a tricycle for Trevor, so that should be all right. Mark was a different kettle of fish. What to get him was a problem. Then she heard it. Harry got me the tickets for the concert as a surprise. What concert? In the capital. Cliff Richard is coming there Christmas week. Agnes knocked over her coffee cup as she jumped up and gathered her bags. She ran out of Arnott's into Henry Street like a shoplifter. She scurried down the GPO arcade and was at the Capitol within 5 minutes of hearing the woman's statement. She went to the box office, breathless. Excuse me, love. What date is the Friday of Christmas week? The girl in the box office looked at a calendar overhead. It's, the 22nd. Right, give me 1 ticket for the 22nd for Cliff Richard concert, up at the front. We're sold out. Well then, the 24th then. I said we're sold out, all sold out, for the whole week, Monday to Saturday. You can't be. Check, any nights. I only want the 1 ticket. Look, missus, we're sold out, right? Jesus, they've been on sale for 2 weeks. We sold out days ago. But you don't understand, love. I'm his best fan in Ireland. You and 50,000 others, missus. Sold out. Now go on and I'll call the usher. Agnes staggered out onto O'Connell Street. She headed for home in a stupor. People walking towards her must have thought she was demented. She moped along, dragging her bags behind her. She couldn't believe it was possible for Cliff Richard to be in Dublin singing to strangers, and not to her, Agnes Browne, his #1 fan in the world. When she entered the flat, she just dropped the bags and slumped into her armchair. Mark came bounding out of the kitchen. Hiya, Ma. Have I got news for you? Put some turf on that fire, Agnes said in a daze. Mark went to the turf bucket and put a couple of sods on the blazing fire. Dusting his hands, he walked over and knelt in front of her. Well, do you want to hear it? He asked excitedly. Yeah, go on then, tell us, she said. I got a job. Mark beamed. Without taking her eyes off the flickering flames in the grate, Agnes patted the boy on the head and said calmly, That's nice, son. That's nice. Nice? It's fucking great, Ma. It's a trade job as well. I'm going to be a carpenter. Agnes suddenly snapped out of her trance. A carpenter? Good boy. How? Mark told the story with enthusiasm. Agnes was really pleased, especially about the schooling. She hugged the boy and made a cup of tea for them both. She then told Mark about her disappointment over the tickets for Cliff Richard. He was sad for her, but perked up when she said, But son, your good news makes up for any disappointment. It really does. But it didn't. Life had snipped yet another of the strings that held up the heart of this woman. Agnes was pleased to meet the famous Mr. Wise at last. He was a nice man, a kind man, and Agnes could see why Mark thought the world of him. Mark had been working for over 2 weeks in Mr. Wise's factory. He loved it. He had made a shelf in that 2-week period, and Mr. Wise had allowed him to keep it as a souvenir of his first effort as a tradesman. It hung beside the cooker and held a tea caddy. The reason Agnes had called to see Mr. Wise was to thank him for his kindness to Mark, and to ask his advice. She had finally decided what to get Mark for Christmas. A set of carpenter's tools, good ones. She knew nothing about tools and figured Mr. Wise was the best man for advice on the matter. He gladly told her what basic tools Mark should have, and over a cup of tea went through the things to look out for when buying them. He told her to go to Lenihan's of Capel Street. She went there the next morning and spent at least an hour picking them out. The shop assistant was very helpful, advising and telling her all the pluses and minuses. When the tools were selected, he parcelled them up for her. She'd intended taking them with her until she got the bill. It totalled £15 and 12 shillings. He asked for 15 and 10, giving her a little discount. I don't have enough with me, she said. That's no problem, love. If you give me a deposit, I can put them away for you, he smiled. Agnes fished in her purse. She took out a 10-shilling note. Would 10 bob be all right for deposit? Absolutely, love. He took the note and wrote out a receipt. He then wrote Browne on the parcel and went out back to store it. Agnes left the shop a bit worried. £15 was a lot to find between now and Christmas Eve. 8 days. But she'd find it. Somehow she'd find it. She checked the Herald clock in Abbey Street. Time to go up to Buddha and collect a tricycle for Trevor. As she turned into O'Connell Street, she saw 4 men out on the top of the Capitol Theatre porch, erecting a giant sign with Cliff's picture on it. A white band across the sign with red letters on it read, "Sold out." She put her head down and walked past. Her mind turned back to money matters. She had £3 in her slipper at home. The following week was Christmas week, but it was never a busy one for her stall. All that sold were potatoes and sprouts, so she couldn't count on more than £3.10 of that. Mark was handing up £1. That was £7 10 shillings. She had made the last payment on her hamper the previous week, so that was all the Christmas food paid for. Buddha owed her £7 and 10 shillings. The tricycle was £2. That meant he had to give her £5.10. That was £13. She could really do with another £10 to get her over Christmas, to buy the tools and then see her into the new year. She looked to heaven and, smiling aloud, said, "Marion, lend us a tenner, will you?" Heaven was the right place to look, she thought to herself, for she could do with a minor miracle. When she arrived back at the flat, she had the tricycle with her. It was yellow and red, and it would make Trevor's eyes glow with joy when he woke to find it waiting under the tree on Christmas morning. The trick was to make sure that neither Trevor nor the other children found it until then. Agnes tiptoed up the stairs. When she arrived at her landing, she opened the door to the water tank for the toilet in the flat below hers. Gently she slid the bike in beside the tank. Mark stored his turf sacks on the other side. She lifted one of the sacks and used it to cover the bike. She closed the door quietly and went up to her own flat. There was great excitement when she came in. Charlie Bennett, the coalman, had delivered the Christmas tree, and the kids were waiting to decorate it. Agnes calmed them all down and promised they would all do it, but after tea. Tea first, tree later, she pronounced. Agnes made the tea, and they were all sitting around the kitchen table when Mark tapped his fork on his cup, like he'd seen a best man do at a wedding. Everybody stopped talking and looked up at him. "What's that for?" Agnes asked. "I'm going to make a speech, ma," he answered. "Oh, I see. Quiet, yous. Listen to your brother, the man of the house." Mark puffed out his chest. "Ahem. I have a surprise for everyone," he began. "The hairs are after falling off your willy," Dermot said, and all the children laughed. Agnes gave Dermot a clip in the ear, but gave a little laugh herself as well. "Don't mind him, son. You go on. You have a surprise for us all. What is it?" "Today I put a 5-shilling deposit on a television set," Mark announced proudly. The cheers and whoops could be heard in Cork. Cathy took Trevor by both his hands, and they danced in a circle, singing, "We're getting a telly, we're getting a telly." Agnes shushed everybody. "You what?" she asked Mark. I put a deposit on a telly," Mark repeated. "How much is this telly going to cost?" 15 shillings a month. It has a slot at the back, and you put 2 bob in it for 5 hours. Every month the man comes to empty the meter. He takes the 15 bob out of what's in it and gives you back the rest.
Agnes thought about this. The children waited on her thoughts in silence. Agnes rested her head on her hands and looked down at the table as she deliberated. After what seemed like an hour to the children, she slowly raised her head. You could hear the damp slack as it hissed on the fire. "All right," she said simply, and mayhem broke out again. Agnes poured herself another cup of tea and sat back at the table. She stared at the face of her eldest boy. It glowed with joy as he watched Cathy and Trevor dance and sing. Agnes leaned over to him and squeezed his arm. He turned and looked at her questioningly. "You're a very good boy," she said with pride. He got embarrassed and dropped his eyes. "Thanks, Mammy." The tellyman installed the telly that night at 7 o'clock. It took some time to fix up the rabbit's ears, but when they were sorted, the entire family sat in front of the set, enthralled. There was one problem. If anybody got up to go to the toilet, the movement affected the reception. So nobody moved, and the ad breaks now became piss breaks. Agnes had a fitful weekend, between the pleasure of the new television and the worry about whether or not she could find the money to get Mark a set of tools. So when she arrived in from work on the following Monday night, and Rory handed her the letter that had arrived that day, it might just as well have had the words "Minor Miracle" printed on it. It was addressed to Mrs. Browne. She opened it and read, "Irish Transport and General Workers Union, Liberty Hall, Dublin. Dear Mrs. Browne, as the widow of a deceased member of this branch, you become entitled to a death benefit. This is a once-off payment of £12, paid on the Christmas of the year of our member's demise. As your husband worked in the Gresham Hotel, the payment will be available for collection there from the shop steward, Eamon Doyle, on the morning of the 22nd of December. May I take this opportunity to offer the condolences of the branch on your loss and wish you and yours a very peaceful Christmas. Signed, Michael Mullen, Branch Secretary." "God bless the Union, and God bless Mickey Mullen," Agnes exclaimed. "And thanks, Marion," she said, smiling and looking up to heaven. Mark knocked on the door. It was cold, freezing cold. His duffel coat hood was pulled up as far as it would go, and he had a scarf wrapped several times around his neck, but still the cold got through. He knocked again. He heard the movement behind the door, then a click, and the door opened a little. Mr. Wise's eyes peered out, and then the door opened wide. "Mark, come in, boy, before you freeze." Mark stepped in, and Mr. Wise closed the door quickly to keep the heat in. They went into the front room where the fire was burning. "Take off your coat, son." "It's okay, Mr. Wise. I only called for a minute." "No, still, take off your coat, or you'll lose the benefit when you go back out." Mark took it off. "So, what brings you knocking on my door during the holidays?" Mr. Wise sat into his armchair. Mark sat too, but on a hard dining chair. "Mr. Wise, you know loads of people, important people, don't you?" "I do. Some important, some who think they're important. So?" "Yeah, well, I want to get me Mammy a ticket for the Cliff Richard concert, and I was wondering, do you know anyone who could get me one?" "Who is Cliff Richard?" "You don't know Cliff? He must be the only person in Ireland that doesn't. He's a singer." "Oh, well, I'm not good at names. Now let me think. Who would I know?" Mr. Wise closed his eyes and with thumb and middle finger held his temple. After a few moments he took his hand away and shrugged. "No, I cannot think of anyone, Mark. I am sorry." And he looked at it. "That's all right. I just thought you might, that's all." Mark started to put his coat on. Mr. Wise stood and pointed a finger in the air. "I have an idea, though." "What?" "Why not get his autograph for your mother?" "He's autographed? What's an autograph?" "If you go to the theatre, say during the day, with a notepad, he will sign his name on it. I dare say that if you tell him the story, he may even write a little note to your mother, too." "Would he do that? It's worth a try, isn't it?" Mark smiled at last. "Yeah, it is, Mr. Wise. Thanks a lot." Mark buttoned up his coat and Mr. Wise went with him to the door. Before he left, Mark took something from his pocket. He handed the colourfully wrapped parcel to Mr. Wise. "Look, I know you don't believe in it, but here, Happy Christmas anyway." Mr. Wise took the parcel and shook Mark's hand. "And a very happy Christmas to you, son. Thank you." Mark stepped out and the door closed. It was just a 15-minute walk to the capital from Mr. Wise's house. Mark walked quickly to keep warm. He was glad he gave the aftershave to Mr. Wise. His mother had never used it, not even once. In Eason's he bought a small notepad and then briskly walked a few steps from there to the Capital box office. The same girl that had greeted Agnes 10 days earlier was there. Mark's head was just visible over the counter. "Hey, young one," he called. The girl who'd been engrossed in a magazine looked up. "What do you want?" "Tell Mr. Richard I want him." "What? I will me shy." "Why not? He's not going to just drop everything and come out to see a little shit like you." "Well, all right then. Which door is it, and I'll go into him." "Get yourself away to be fucked. Go on, get lost." "Here, all I want is his autograph on that." Mark pushed a little notepad towards her. The girl had gone back to her magazine and she ignored him. Mark persisted. "Here, hey, tell him it's from me Mammy. Her name is Agnes. Tell him to write it on a note." The girl leaned forward and called, "Arthur! Arthur, come out here!" The double doors of the stalls area opened and a huge fat man in military-style uniform marched out.
"What's up, Gillian?"
he asked in a gravelly voice. "This little fucker, he won't go away. He's annoying me." Mark smiled up at the usher. "How are you? I need to get Mr. Richard to sign this." Again he held out the notebook. In one swift movement, the usher snatched the book, tore it in half, and tossed it into the litter bin in the lobby. He then, in the time-honoured tradition of the doorman, said,
"Right, son. Fuck off. Go on."
Mark stared aghast at the litter bin. The usher moved to him and pushed him towards the door. Mark squared up to the man. The big usher stood, legs apart, and put his hands on his hips. He saw the anger in Mark's face and smiled.
"Don't fucking annoy me, son. Now move."
Mark's right foot moved quicker than the usher expected. It made contact, on target, between the big man's legs. Mark could only see his ankle sock as his foot vanished into the man's crotch.
"Oh, you little bollocks!"
the man screamed as his face turned a crimson red. Mark ran to the doors and into his first problem. Like many theatres, the Capitol had 6 glass entrance doors, and, like many theatres, only one of these was left unlocked during office hours. Mark could not remember quick enough which one he had come in. He made a choice. The one on the far left. Wrong. The next one. Locked. The next one down was the door to freedom, but the usher got there first.
"Right, Mr. fucking Hardman. Try that again."
Mark now met his second problem. By the time Mark reached home, his left eye was just about fully closed, and had started to change colour from purple to black. The eye had gone with the man's first blow. Mark went down on the cold tile surface. The gleaming black leather shoes of the usher had put the bruises that now covered Mark's back and chest. Mark had limped home. Agnes yelped when she saw the state of him. "What happened to you?" She ran to him. "A fight. It's nothing." "Are you hurt?" No, I'm grand, Ma," he lied. Dermot jumped up from the chair in front of the telly. "Jesus, what a beauty! Who won?" It was a draw." "Who was it, Marco? Was it Mallet Maguire?" Dermot knew these things. "No, some fella from Pearse Street." Agnes spun towards him. "You stay away from Pearse Street. They used razors over there. Do you hear me?" Yeah, Ma, yeah, I hear you." Mark went to his bedroom and lay down. Dermot followed him in and sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at Mark and smiled. "So, Marco, what really happened, huh? Who gave you the hiding?" Mark laughed and told Dermot the whole story. Next day was December 22nd, and Agnes had lots of jobs for the boys to do. However, Mark and Dermot had an errand of their own to take care of first. They waited now in the archway of the GPO. The Garda was standing by the main entrance where he always stood. The boys waited. "This had better not backfire on us, Dermot," Mark said. He was worried. "It won't. Leave it to me." "Make sure you're right beside the copper, right?" "I will. It'll be all right. Just wait and see." Dermot was confident. Around the corner, at the same time as yesterday, when the two boys followed him, came the big usher from the Capitol, strutting along as if the city belonged to him, a newspaper under his arm. "Go, now!" Mark pushed Dermot. Dermot ran up to the usher and tugged at his coat. The big man stopped and looked down at the boy.
"What do you want?"
the man asked gruffly. "Is this yours, mister?" Dermot held out a 6-penny coin. The man bent to look at what was in the boy's hand. As he did, Dermot slapped him as hard as he could with his right fist. The blow caught the giant right in the eye. He instinctively grabbed Dermot. Now it was Mark's turn to kick into action.
As planned, he ran for the Garda. Dermot began to scream.
No, no, me mammy told me not to talk to men like you. Let me go, I don't want to.
You little bastard, I'll break your fucking neck, the giant roared, holding onto his now swelling eye with one hand whilst clutching Dermot firmly in the other. The policeman intervened. Unhand that boy, the Garda said with authority. Let him go, now. The giant pushed the policeman away. Go away, I'll take care of this little fucker myself. The Garda drew his baton and waved it menacingly. Release him right now, boyo. The usher dropped the boy. Dermot, in an Oscar-winning performance, hugged the Garda's leg.
Please, Garda, please don't make me do it. Please keep him away from me.
It's all right, son. Calm down. Nobody's going to hurt you. Now, what's going on here? Dermot sniffled and wiped his eyes. A crowd had now gathered around the group, and ears were being cocked to catch the whole story. Dermot began.
This man asked me to go down the lane with him for the wee-wee.
Dermot cried like a baby. The crowd were not pleased. They began to mutter, and the policeman could envisage an ugly scene on his hands. That's a lie, the usher protested.
No, it's not. I heard him saying it.
Mark came in now. The usher turned towards the voice and saw Mark. You little bastard! He now lunged at Mark. Without a moment's hesitation, the Garda brought the baton down full strength between the big man's shoulder blades. He dropped like a sack of potatoes. One or two of the crowd poked a bit of boot in here and there. The Garda put a knee into the man's back and handcuffed him with his arms behind his back. In the mayhem, Mark and Dermot slipped away. The two boys skipped up O'Connell Street, elated with the success of their plan. That showed them, Dermot yelled with delight. Yeah, don't fuck with Mrs. Browne's boys, added Mark. And they both laughed heartily. They were still abuzz when they came into the flat. Agnes smiled at them. Yous are full of the joys, she remarked. Yeah, Mark said, as he flopped onto the couch. Dermot, of course, went straight to the telly. Yous needn't think yous are going to sit in front of that, announced Agnes. I have work for yous. Turn it off. Dermot turned the television set off. Now, Mark, put Trevor's coat on him, and the three of yous go round to the Gresham and pick up a message for me off Mr. Eamon Doyle. Who's he? Mark asked. He's a steward in the shop, I think. Just ask for them. Mark wrapped Trevor up like a bag of rags, and the trio set off for the Gresham Hotel. In the streets, the people were in good festive mood, shouting hello and happy Christmas to each other. The Gresham was a wondrous place. The boys climbed spotless white marble steps and went into the lobby. The massive expanse of royal blue carpet with gigantic Waterford crystal chandeliers and deep buttoned leather seating were all the things the boys had only ever seen on the movies. People were milling through the lobby in fur coats, three-piece suits and fancy hats. Mark felt dirty. They stood awkwardly for a moment, and then a woman came out from behind the desk. Mark was expecting a tongue lashing, but instead she was nice. "Hello, boys. Can I help you?" she asked with a smile. "We're looking for Mr. Eamon Doyle," Mark told her. "Are you now? Well, it will take a few minutes to get him. You'll have to wait." Mark took Trevor's hand again and began to turn him round. "We'll wait outside. Tell him, will you?" "You will not wait outside. It's much too cold," the woman insisted. "Come over here." She brought them to a table around which there were 4 chairs. She called a waiter and told him to get the 3 boys a soda and biscuits. Mark panicked. "Here, missus, I've no money." The woman smiled. "That's okay, it's Christmas. This is on the house. Just sit there and I'll fetch Mr. Doyle. What's your name?" "Browne. We're all Brownes. I'm Mark." "Okay, Mark, you enjoy your soda and I'll be back in a minute." And she was gone. The waiter arrived with the drinks and a huge plate of assorted biscuits. Pink wafers, chocolate ones with jelly sweets on top, all kinds. Mark gave Trevor one for each hand. After a few minutes, Mr. Doyle arrived. "Hello, boys." "How are you?" Mark answered. Doyle took a snow-white envelope from his pocket and handed it to Mark. "There, give that to your mother, and don't hang around here too long." His disdain was obvious. "Did you know me, Da?" Dermot asked Doyle. "No, I don't know many of the kitchen porters." He was short with them and anxious to be away. "Well, he knew you," Dermot said. "Good," the man said, and began to walk away. "He said you were the bollocks," Dermot added. The man turned. "What?" Mark butted in. "He said thanks a lot, mister." The man stared for a moment and then left without another word. "Right, come on," Mark said. He stood up and took Trevor's hand. With his other hand, Trevor was pointing at the elevator. "Mecco, bust. "It's not a bus, Trevor. It's a lift, and it's not for us." "Let's bring him on it," Dermot said. No, we'll only get into trouble. Now, come on, Marco. One quick trip up and down. Marco looked around. Maybe no one would notice. They headed for the lift doors and waited for them to open. At the same time, Doyle was at the porter's desk, speaking to the uniformed concierge, telling him about the little gurriers and instructing him to escort them out. The concierge went looking for the boys. Mark was first to see him coming. Oh, fuck, look, Dermo. Dermo followed Mark's gaze and saw the uniformed man looking for them. Fuck me, another usher. Dermo was scared now. The lift doors opened. Quick, Marco, jump in, quick! Dermo called, pulling Mark's arm. The concierge saw them just at that moment. Hey, you there, he called out. Mark jumped into the lift and the doors began to close. Which button, yelled Dermo. Any bleeding button, Mark said, and as he did so, he hit the highest one. They saw the concierge's nose disappear between the closing doors. As the lift ascended, they could hear the man banging on the doors below. We're in big trouble, Dermo. I know. The lift stopped on the top floor and the three boys stepped out into a silent corridor. Which way? Dermot whispered. I don't know. Any way except down, I suppose. You go that end and I'll go this way and see if there's a stairs. The boys parted, but each made sure the other was in sight at all times. Dermot found the stairs. Mark! Mark! Stairs! Mark lifted Trevor up and began to run toward Dermot. Dermot stepped into the landing and looked down between the rails. His heart sank when he saw the peaked cap bobbing as it came up the stairs. It was 3 floors below. He darted back into the corridor. They have it covered. Just then, a door opened on the corridor. A dark man looked out and in a soft, childlike voice said, Are you boys all right? Mark was silent, but Dermot was too scared to be silent. The usher's after us, mister. He's going to kill us. The dark man stepped into the corridor and scooped young Trevor in his arms. Quickly, get in here. The boys vanished through the door. Excuse me, sir, a breathless voice called from the top of the stairs. The man handed Trevor to Mark and put a finger to his mouth. He then stepped back into the corridor. Yes? The porter was panting. He caught his breath in gulps. I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I'm looking for 3 urchins. They're on the loose in the hotel. Have you seen them? The man thought for a moment. I haven't seen any urchins. Thank you, sir, said the porter, and set off on his chase again. The man closed the door. Is he gone? A muffled voice asked from under the bed. The man knelt down to speak to Dermot. He smiled. Yes, he's gone. The coast is clear. Mark studied this man, this hero. He was dark and young and tall, but not fat. And he had kind eyes. Dermot scrambled from under the bed and joined his 2 brothers in the corner. Kind Eyes spoke. What was that all about? Or would you prefer not to tell me? The boys looked at each other. Dermot spoke first. The usher was going to kill us because we bashed his mate. No, it's not like that, Mark interrupted and began to tell the story. Kind Eyes was easy to talk to. The boys relaxed and sat on the bed. Trevor curled up and slept for a while, sucking his thumb. Throughout the conversation, Kind Eyes would get up and offer the boys a drink or a biscuit or a sweet, all gratefully received. He wanted to know everything, and they told him. About Red's death, about Marion, about Mr. Wise, the usher, everything. But mostly about their mammy. Before they knew it, an hour had passed. Mark jumped when he heard the time. Come on, you 2. Ma's waiting for us. The boys gathered themselves together and stepped into the corridor. Kind Eyes spoke softly to them. See that door at the end? The boys nodded. Well, that leads to the fire escape. You go down those stairs and nobody will see you leave. Thanks, mister. The boys set off. Kind Eyes went back into his room and picked up an envelope from the floor. The address said, Mrs. Agnes Browne, 92, James Larkin Court. He set off quickly after the boys. At the top of the fire escape, he called to them, Mark, Trevor. The boys were 4 floors below. They froze. What? Mark called back. You dropped this. Kind Eyes waved the envelope. Mark handed Trevor to Dermot and tripped up the stairs. He took the envelope and said, Thanks, mister. Kind Eyes smiled and winked. Mister? Asked Mark. Yes, Mark. What's your name? My name? Harry. Harry Webb. Well, happy Christmas, Harry Webb. You too, Mark Browne. Mark joined the other 2 and the 3 sneaked back into the safe, busy streets of Dublin. It was a quiet Christmas Eve. As it fell on a Sunday, this meant that only a few shops were open, and even those were only open for half the day. Agnes set off early down to Cable Street to collect the tools for Mark. She had the £15 in her handbag, along with £7 to spare. She strolled down O'Connell Street, taking in the festive atmosphere. At the bottom of Henry Street, she stopped for a chat with some dealers, out trying to sell off the last of the Christmas wrapping paper. Next, she went to the newsagent in Talbot Street, where she bought 200 cigarettes and a newspaper. She had started buying a newspaper every day now, to see what would be on the television. She crossed over O'Connell Street again and walked toward Middle Abbey Street. This brought her past the front of the Capitol Theatre. As she passed, she saw the usher standing in the hallway. He had a black eye, and his right arm was in a sling. Poor man, she thought. Then she heard a voice crying, "Concert tickets, concert tickets! Last of the concert tickets!" It was a ticket tout. Agnes's heart lifted. She went over to him. "Are they Cliff Richard tickets, love?" she asked. "Nah, he finished up last night," the man answered. Agnes just said, "Oh," and went on her way. So, he had come and he had gone. Oh well. She got the Lenahans and paid the balance of her bill. As she made her way home, she was filled with the excitement of all the surprises she had for the children. By 6 o'clock she had cleaned and stuffed the turkey, the ham was boiling away in the pot, and the trifle was setting in the larder. 2 bathfuls of water saw the entire family bathed, as they did it in relays. Instead of calling them to the kitchen, Agnes let the children have their tea by the fire on the floor. The Christmas lights were twinkling on the tree, and the laughter of the children at the television programme they were watching lifted her spirits. Agnes began to hum to herself in the kitchen. "Santa Claus is coming to town. Oh, you better watch out." There was a knock at the front door. "I'll get it," cried Mark. Agnes wondered who would be calling at tea time on Christmas Eve. She went out to see, wiping her hands on the tea towel as she went. Mark opened the door, and for a moment Agnes could not make out who it was. "Harry!" Mark cried. Agnes's chin dropped. So did the tea towel. "Cliff," she said. "Hello, Mrs. Browne," he said softly. "Cliff," Agnes repeated. Mark looked from one to the other and shook his head. "No, Ma, this is Harry. He's a friend of ours." Agnes was about to topple over, and Cliff brushed past Mark to catch her in his arms. Suddenly it all clicked for Mark. He ran to the television and turned it off. Quickly he switched on the radiogram, putting the needle on whatever record was there. It was a Cliff Richard one, of course. Agnes recovered a little and brushed her hair back. The music played softly. Cliff smiled at her. "What about a dance?" he asked softly. She smiled. "Oh, yes." He took her in his arms and they began to sail around the room. The children looked on entranced. Dermot, mouth open, Simon scratching his head in wonderment, but knowing something nice was happening. Kathy with her knees tucked under her chin and giggling away to herself. Rory with a tear in his eye, and Frankie standing up slowly as recognition dawned on him. Agnes looked at her children as she swirled around. The fire glowed on their faces and the Christmas lights sparkled in their eyes. She felt dizzy and a little faint, just for a moment. She closed her eyes, and in the distance she could hear Marion give a yelp of laughter, and she laughed happily to herself. Mark slowly and gently lifted Trevor onto his lap. Trevor laughed and pointed at the dancing couple. "Harry," he gurgled. "Yeah, Trev, that's Harry," Mark whispered back. Trevor smiled and pointed again. "Mama?" Mark smiled a beaming smile and whispered, "Yeah, Trev, that's her. That's our Mammy." Sometimes this turbulent, tragic, sad and busy world turns on its head and comes to a sudden halt, just to accommodate somebody's dream. Dream on, Agnes Browne. For everyone's sake, dream on.
Belinda Audio and the O'Brien Press hope you enjoyed the reading of The Mammy, Agnes Browne, Book 1, written and read by Brendan O'Carroll. Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of audio titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook with you.